we can use the if function to write a lot less lines of code. So if we look back to the first if else we created, we had this here where we had if the name is error, print one thing, and if it's not error, we print another thing for the color here. So we could pull this exact same thing off by, let's come in and delete both of these, and we could write in color. So if we could say the name is equal to error, we want RGBA white 0.8, and if it's not, because the second one here is false, we could do RGBA black 0.8. And let's come all the way to here and hit save. And you can see it's actually the same results. And just to show you that it is compiling, I'll just switch these over, red and blue, blue, black, blue. And there we go, it's compiling out. So I have my blue, and my red right there. So we can do the exact same thing we had before, but have it on one line here instead of all of that stuff we wrote before. This option is a little nicer and a lot faster to write than what we had before. That's because it's less versatile, and I find myself not using it that much because I forget about it pretty much. We can't add else if statements in there, so it's either true or false, and that's it. And it also needs something to return, whether it's true or false. And we don't always want that. What if we just don't want something to print? Because I can't come in here and leave that blank because it's looking for a second thing. I need to have a second property, wrong number of arguments. You can't do the if with you can't only have a true statement. You need a true and a false, and you can't have more than two. So you can't have like if else, and finally an else statement. It's one or the other. So because it's less versatile, I personally don't end up using it very much. That doesn't mean it's not something you shouldn't be using. As you can see, you can write a lot less CSS if you think about it a little bit while you're doing it. But again, you also have to write it a little bit differently because it's not included. We don't start with the if here. It's only where a value would go. So it has to be just the color all by itself here, and then it just gets inputted where the color is. So that's also really important to remember because I've had times where I forgot that and couldn't figure out what was wrong, and I was very upset about it. So don't waste your time on something like that if you can avoid it. Sass has a ton of functions included with it, including a few that we've already looked at. So we have the RGBA function. So RGBA, it's not the traditional RGBA. We can give it just a straight up color in any way we want, and it will turn it into an RGB value for us. And then we can just put in the transparency for the alpha that we want there, and it will output that as well. Our lighten and darken let us make things lighter or darker. So here I've lightened my red by 20%, and we can see it gets more of a pinky value. I can darken white by 50, it outputs gray. I can mix two colors, so I'm mixing red and blue, and it's outputting purple. I can adjust a hue, so I can get red 180 degrees on the color wheel, and it will put out cyan. So this if here is a function, so it's if true, blue, and if it was false, it would be red. So if I switch this over to false, you can see that's now switched over to red. So this is a function right there. There are a lot of other functions we have access to as well, and some of which we'll be looking at this section of the course. The main purpose of this section, though, is to take a look at creating our own custom functions. Sometimes we need to be able to do something on our own. So the basics of creating our own function are really easy. We use, it's a directive, so it starts with the @ symbol and then function. And then we give it a name. If we need arguments, which you probably will, you can put in your arguments, argument 1, arg2, etc. And then what does the function do? So in here we put what it does. So anything you want it to do will go to here. Now the one thing that's a little bit different with a function is we need it to output something. So for example, on this if else statement, I'm saying if this is true or false, it's going to either return this or it's going to return this, depending on whether this is true or false. So it's a little bit the same here. So what am I spitting out? So I could come in here and say arg1. So let's just change this to be something that's a little more practical. So let's say we make a function called add, and we have number 1 and number 2. So in here I could say that I want my function to add num1. Now this isn't going to work, and it's not actually going to do anything. And the reason that this isn't going to do anything is because the function will work, it will add it, but it doesn't know what to do with these numbers. What we have to do is we have to tell it to return those numbers. We want it to spit these numbers out. So for example, we have that function now, so I could come down here and say, I don't know, body width is add, and I can use the function. So I'm just taking the name of the function that I created and putting it down here, just like I would for anything else. And then in here I can say 2 and 3 pixels. Save, and I get 5 pixels. And so I can say 100 pixels, 200 pixels, and it would give me 300 pixels. Now that's kind of useless because I can already do math in SAS, but it gives you an idea of how this is all working. Now one thing we could also do in this is we could put in a variable number of arguments. So here, instead of num1 like that, what we could do is just put nums ... and that's going to give it as many nums as I put in there. Now in this case, because we don't know how many numbers we're actually going to have, it gets a little bit more complicated. So what I'm going to first do is I'm going to make a total. So our total at the very beginning is going to be 0, because right now we don't have anything at all. And this is just so I can keep adding my numbers together. I'm going to keep adding them to my total. So because we don't know how many we have, we can use our each directive. So I can see each num, or each, I'll say number, for each number in nums, we want to do something. So if you remember, what we were doing is the each directive works. So it's going to look at however many numbers I wrote in here. So for every number in nums, we want to do something. And what we want to do is update our total. So our total will change to be total plus number. So our total is 0. Then it's going to go and say, if I leave it like this, it's going to do 100. So it's going to look at the number 100. So total is 0 plus that. So the total has now become 100. Then it's going to go back through. And now remember, total is reached. At this point, total is 100. So it's going to run it through again. Okay, now we're going to get our next number, 200. So this has now become 100. So 100 plus our number of 200 will become 300. So that should output that. So then at the very end, we want to return total. So let's save that. And, well, it should say the same. Let's see what happens if I add 1000 to this. Save. And right away you can see that has updated to 1300. If I bring this all the way down and I only have one number, it works as well there. So you can have a variable amount. This, again, isn't the most realistic situation. You probably wouldn't want to be doing an addition thing like this, but it's just to show you that this is something that is available to you with the functions. But I think now we'll look at actually some more realistic functions and things that you might actually want to use these for, now that we sort of understand a little bit of how they work. Okay, so for this one, I have given you a starter file so you can play along with me here, and we're going to be doing some dynamic setting of colors and stuff, so it's nice to actually be able to see what we're doing instead of just seeing the output. So just to look at really quickly the starter file, the SCSS for it, I'm just pretty much setting the body to be the full thing and display flex. So I have some columns. I've set them all to flex 1 so they spread out. And I've just used display grid and place items center to get these centered within their parent. And that's about it. And I'm also including these variables that are right here just because we're going to use these in our documents. You can see we have a light blue, a sort of turquoisey color, a dark grayish color, and a really dark, almost black color right there. If we look at here, just it's div class 1, div class 2, div class 3. There's nothing special going on in the HTML. So what do we want to do here? I'm going to scroll down and we're just going to pay attention to that. So before we can get started with this, one thing that I want to look at is we are going to be using the lightness function, which is a pre-built function of lightness. So let's just start by seeing what that does. And to do that, I'm just going to move this a bit bigger. So on my, let's just do 1. And I'm going to write in content is lightness of primary. And let's save that. And so you can see what that is coming out to. Here is the content is 666, or the content is coming out to 66%. And if I switch this over to secondary, we're going to get a different number. So now 62. And if I switch this over to accent, we get a darker one. So the lightness is 31. And just for fun, we should do the black, and this should be a very low number. The lightness is only 13%. So what this is doing is it's taking a look at the HSL value of my color. So it's taking it from something like this. So it's taking it from the hex code and turning it into an HSL. So the HSL is hue, saturation, and lightness. Hue would be what color it is. Saturation is how much of that color there is, sort of. And lightness is where it is on a scale of 0 to 100, looking at if is it really light or is it really not light or dark. So 100% lightness would be white and 0% lightness would be black. So the brighter something is, the higher the value. The lower it is, the darker the value. And we can use this to dynamically set our colors. So let's just do a nice simple look at this. So we can create our function. So it's at function. I'm going to put DC for dynamic color, but if you want to come up with something a bit different, you can. And I need this to accept an argument. So it's going to accept the argument of color. Now, for this to work, we have to use an if statement, because I want to say if it's lighter than a certain color, put my text color to black, and if it's darker than a certain color, set it to white. So let's check this out. I can do if an if statement, if you remember, is at if lightness. And we want to take this color here. So we want to check whatever color I put into my function, I want to check its lightness. And I want to see if it's greater than or less than 50. So if the lightness is greater than 50, meaning it's lighter than gray, we're getting into the lighter colors, we can return black. And else return white. So the idea here is if it's lighter than gray, we want our text to be black. And if it's darker than gray, we want our text to be white. So we can test this out. Let's say .1 background, and I'm just going to write black for now. Hit save. So we can see that I've set my background to black and I can't see anything. So now I can come and use my function. So I just have to write color DC and the color I want. So I'm just going to put the same color I already had of black. And look at that, it's turned to white. And if I change, now obviously with black I want white and white I want black. So where this can be a bit more fun, let's just create some space here. 2 and 3. So I don't really know how dark or how light my variables are. So if I say the background on one is primary, and then I can say that the color is dynamic color primary. And then we can do the same thing. I'll just copy and paste this to speed things up, but switch this one over to secondary, and accent, and accent, and hit save on that. And like magic, they all go, and you can see that the colors on them have updated. So these ones have gone to black, and this one here is the lighter color. Now if I come up to my variables here and I update these, so my primary right now is there, but let's just say I come on to this. So let's say I come up to my primary here and I update it, and I go, actually my primary needs to be a little bit darker. I do that, I hit save, and the color of the text updated itself automatically. So I think that's really cool and handy. Now one of the advantages of doing it this way is if you're theming things and you need to quickly change themes, you can have the text colors quickly update themselves. Also, if you're just throwing something together really fast, it can obviously really help because you're not worrying too much about things. And even if you're using this for your actual website or an actual production build, this can be used, but you'd probably want to update a little bit. So we'll look at how we can do that in the next video. So one thing we can do to make this look a little bit nicer just in general, and this is more of a style tip than it is a Sass anything, but right now this is set to just pure white or pure black. I do have a black color that's in my theme, so I think what I'm going to do is switch that over to that one. So it's a little bit, you can barely notice the difference. But also what I can do is I can actually have this return an RGB value or RGBA value instead of like putting it at say 75% transparency. And then the white 2 here, RGBA white 0.75, save. And the advantage of this is it allows a little bit of the background color to come through. So the text will always be in the dark or light, but it's going to be showing a little bit of that color through. So here, if this primary color, if I change it this time to completely different, let's go into the oranges or reds here, and I save that, you can see there's a little bit of that orange is coming into the text. And if I come onto my secondary here, and we'll keep this one a darker color, or not a darker color, we'll keep it a lighter color just so it stays dark text. And save that. So a little bit of that pink is showing through on here. It makes it, first of all, look a little bit more natural. There's less high contrast, but there's still enough contrast to make it easy to read. So it's a nice way that it can just help your things look a little bit nicer by having the lower alpha on your text there. Now, hopefully while I was creating this, you were looking at this going, well, it's annoying that I have to write the background and then the color again, and then background and then color again, and so forth and so on like that. And yeah, it is, and we probably wouldn't want to be doing that in the real world. That just becomes a lot of repetition, and we're using Sass. A big part of Sass is being able to avoid repetition. So another challenge here, see if you can figure out how we can do it so I don't have to write both of these here. I can write just one thing, one line of code, and have it do my text color and my background color both at the same time and have it dynamically set like we've done so far. Now, just a word of warning, you can't do this with just a function. We want to keep the function we currently have. We want to keep using that, but we have to use something else that we've already seen to be able to do it, because as you'll notice with a function, I can only output values with this. I can't have it spit out a whole bunch of code. There's something else we use to spit out whole bunches of code. Think of it and get it to work. Try it out. See if you can get it actually working. And then in the next video, we'll look at the solution. Okay, so I hope that you took the time to try and figure this one out. And the solution is we need to use a mix-in. Now there's two different ways. You could make a mix-in and have this inside your mix-in, but I'm going to encourage you to actually have it outside of it. So I'm going to come in here. We're going to add in a mix-in, and I'm going to call this one, for now, I'm actually just going to use the same name. You might want to use different names in the real world, just because it's a bit repetitious. Or even here, let's actually change dynamic. I'm not actually going to have to type this out anywhere, so I can be more verbose in this point, because the only place it's going to be found is inside of this function, or probably the only place it's going to be found is inside of this function. So once again, this is going to have to accept a color. And then in here, we can put in our mix-in. So the mix-in is nice and easy. It's our background is going to be color. And my actual color of the text is going to use my dynamic color and color. So pretty much what I was typing out here every time, I don't want to have to repeat that every single time, so I can include that all in a function. The advantage of doing it this way and having this separate instead of including that in here as a big thing, and which you could definitely do, is just that if ever you needed to do it with not inside your mix-in for any reason, or for, whatever it is, or you didn't want your background, I don't know why, but you didn't want these two to be linked together. You wanted to sort of set a background and then set a different color in here for some reason. It's just nice having them as separate. So you do have the choice of using this separately, and it's not forced to stay inside of the mix-in. So here what I could do is we can update this. So delete, delete, delete. And now all I need to do is my @include DC, and let's just write in different colors. @include DC gray, and I'm going to do gray on purpose here just to show you what happens in this case. And include DC, let's say, and on this one we'll do pink. Save. And so you can see that it's working nicely. Now the one place this can fail is if the I did greater than 50. So if this is exactly, if the color falls on exactly 50, you can run into some issues with it picking the wrong one. And with some lighter colors, every now and then you might find yourself running into a little bit of an issue with it. But you can see here that it is working. Primary, secondary, and this last one should have it change the text color over to accent. And there we go, you can see it changing. So it is working nicely, and it just makes it a lot easier including it in a mix-in instead of having to write out the background color and the color every single time. Sometimes when you do more complicated things with Sass, you or someone else might enter an invalid argument or do something that causes a problem. And sometimes it can be really hard to find what that problem is. Sass comes with 3 directives that help us plan for these situations: warn, debug, and error. So in this little section of the course, we're going to be looking at what we can do with them and how they can be really useful. The first directive we're going to take a look at for this section of the course is the warn directive. So this directive lets us build warnings into our code, but be warned, pun intended, people may not notice them. As an example, let's make a really basic mix-in here. So if I do mix-in, and this is one you'd never want to actually use, but that's okay, and color. And what this mix-in does is let us set the color of something. So obviously it's completely useless. But just it will be by making it simple, it'll help illustrate the point. And I purposely have my terminal open here because we sort of need it. So we'll look. So let's use this now. So body. Then I can do an at. I was going to just write color. At include text color and say red. So if I save that, it works. My body's background, or my body's text color is set to red. That's all fine and dandy. But what if I came in here and I put the number 1? Well, now my color is set to 1. That's not good. It's not going to render, obviously. So there are ways that we can stop this from happening or throw out something, cause something to happen. So what we can do here is we can make, if the person puts in something that's not a color, we can have it throw a warning. So I'm going to do that using an if statement. So if type of, if you remember the type of, we have to write in what are we looking for. So I looked at this briefly a while back. So we can type of color. So what this is going to do is it's going to look at what the person entered in here as their argument, and it's going to evaluate it. So we want to say type of color is not equal to. So if you remember back, we can do equal to like this, double equal sign would be equal. So if it is equal to, we could do that. And if you want not equal to, it's exclamation mark equal. So is not equal to, and color, just like that. So now I can build in, put in something here. So we, just to show you, I'll add in background type of color, just to show you what it's doing. So if I save that, it's showing me that it's actually a number. So it's doing the type of. So type of looks at what it is and evaluates it. So we can see that it is a number. If we change this from 1 to red, and I save that, it doesn't actually output anything because it is a number. And the other, there's a few other things in here that we could put just to show you. If I write in false, it's a Boolean, and if I come in here and write in false but inside of parentheses, it's a string because it's seeing it as a bit of text that's being written. So obviously we don't want it to actually print out anything. We want it to throw a warning. So here I'm going to do at warn to use the warn directive, and we could say this mix-in only accepts colors. Save. But when I save there, you'll notice it's still working. It's still printing it out. But if you come down and look in my terminal here, you can see that it gave me a big warning. This mix-in only accepts colors on line 3. So the line 3 is saying where the warning is, and from line 9. So line 9 is what's causing the error to be thrown. Now if I switch this over to red now, I can see that it worked and it's not giving me an error. So this can be useful, or maybe it wouldn't be only accepts colors, because it could be maybe this should you could have a bit better of a warning there, but it gives you an idea of how it works. So unlike a warning, the error directive will actually stop your SAS from compiling, and that can be a lot more useful. So let's take this exact same example, but instead of having a warn, we could use error. So right now I'll save it. It should work. There's no issues. But let's switch this over from red to something that's not actually a color. Let's just try 5 and hit save. And whoop, look, my CSS didn't compile, and it actually output this massive error here. Now I'm getting an error in here, but I'm also getting this, and this is where it's more useful, because I can see this mixin only accepts colors on line 3 of from line 9. So it's exactly the same. It'll also print out where the whole issue is here. But it throws the error. It stops my CSS from compiling. And in my CSS, I can see the error here. It also gives a backtrace. We're not going to worry too much about that at the moment. If I come all the way down, what it's also doing here is in the body, it's printing out the error as well. So if we go and look at this in the browser, we can actually see here in our actual document, it's printing out the error here as well, because you're not always going to be looking at your CSS file to see it. But when you open your actual site, you're going to see a nice big error at the top, and you're going to know right away that the SAS didn't compile, and you're going to see the error, which obviously can be very useful for finding problems in it. There's a lot of pre-built in errors in SAS. You might have already run into this happening in your own code, just because along the way you might have made a little mistake and seen that SAS comes with a lot of things that will stop it from compiling. Say you use a variable that doesn't exist, or if you use a mix-in name that isn't real, it will do the same thing. So while this is useful, getting an error like this doesn't tell the person exactly what they did wrong. And sometimes you want to say like, okay, it's not working because you put this in and it should have been something else. So here we're saying it only accepts colors, but we could be really explicit. We can use interpolation to tell them exactly what they put in wrong. So this mixin only accepts colors. We could instead put this mixin requires a color you entered, and then we could use our interpolation color and hit save on that. And now you're going to see that it actually says this mixin requires a color you entered 5. So it's saying exactly what the problem was. And if we look up here, actually it's a little bit easier to read it. Again, it's stopping and it's giving it the whole you entered 5 on line 3 and it gives you the whole error there. Now, commonly you'll also see this inside of backticks, like that, where you put the interpolation just so it sort of highlights, because you might have that in a really long string and you want to highlight it. And so instead of using quotation marks, you'll surround their code in backticks like that. And the backtick is right above your tab key next to the number 1. Now, debug is an interesting directive, and it lets us debug stuff. It's a little bit similar to warn, but the difference between a debug and a warn, first of all, warnings can actually be quieted, meaning if you go to, when you enter in your SAS watch, where's my SAS watch? When you do watch, there's another flag called quiet. So if you did watch and then -- quiet, it would actually make it so errors don't appear when you're writing your code. The other thing, whereas a debug is always going to appear. The other thing is debug works a little bit differently, and it's useful for when obviously you're debugging things. And so this is a bit of a basic example, but say you're coming up on something like this and you can't remember what your colors are or something like that. It does have to, because it has to compile with your CSS. You can't just do a debug like floating around out here. I would have to have, let's just do body. And in here I could write debug primary, debug secondary, debug accent, save. And you'll notice that my CSS compiles normally. Nothing changes in my actual CSS. But if I come in and I look here in my terminal, I've got debug and it's showing me what these, so I put primary, secondary, accent, and this is showing me what's actually coming out from those. So it's showing me the hex value of those three, what it would actually compile to. You can also use debugging for doing math. So say you came here and you did 10 pixels plus 100 pixels divided by 50 pixels for some reason, and I hit save. Right there we can see that comes out to 12 pixels. This in general is more useful if you're doing sort of complicated, if you're running on more complicated functions and you're trying to do some things that are a bit different, and for some reason the value's not coming out the way you want and you're not sure why. You could run a quick part of the operation through the debug and see what's actually coming out at the end, because maybe it's not what you're expecting. What if I did this? Well, now it's giving me 12, but it's giving me 12 without any unit on it, because what it's doing first is this division, pixels divided by pixels, it's getting rid of it, and then I'm getting left with just the 10 without anything, so it's adding the 2 plus the 10, and it has no units on it. So just doing some quick operations here sometimes that are part of a larger function can help you find the issue that you're having along the way. Personally, I don't use debug very often, but I think it's important to show you guys just in case you run across situations where it could be helpful for you. The same with warnings. I'm not really big on using warnings. Most of the time I'm using errors, because I find stopping the compiling of the code and actually showing me that there is a big mistake and I can see it really quickly and really easily, for me, is the most useful. Warnings you'll often get in frameworks. So if you are working on a framework, sometimes it can be useful. If a feature's going to be depreciated in the future, they often put a warning on it. They want it to still work, everything is fine with it, but they're just throwing a warning saying in the next version of this isn't going to work anymore, so maybe you should think about changing it, and things like that. So personally, for my own projects, it's not something that I tend to focus on, but errors I definitely use. I find they can be very, very useful. I could have introduced Sass maps back when I first introduced lists, but without knowing the control directives that we just covered in the previous videos, they are a little bit useless. This map section is a bit of a long one compared to my other sections. Part of that is because maps are powerful, but they're a little bit tricky, but mainly it's long because there are a lot of different ways to access and to use them, all of which give us a good refresher on the control directives we've covered so far. So even if you're a little bit shaky on what we've already covered, we're going to be reusing a lot of those things. So hopefully this section will help reinforce a lot of what you've already learned, and at the same time give us a new tool that we can be using when writing our websites. Now we all know what a list is. So here I have my list, and in here I can put a color. And we know we can have multiple things in our list and so on and so forth. And they're also very easy to access. So, might do that and then have that, and it's easy to use my list. It's easy to access the things that are in my list. Maps are a little bit more work, but they're pretty much just a fancy type of list. They're also really popular. You'll see them used all over the place in the real world, and they help us stay a little bit more organized. Let's start with what we already know about lists. So a list can contain any number of things and any type of thing, like a string or a number or a boolean or anything like that. So just for example, I already have my list there, another list, and in here I can put in a string, hello, goodbye, and one more list I'll make right here, and in here we could have false and true, for example. So my booleans are right there. And don't forget, if I had just one thing like that, this is pretty much a variable, but it's a list also just with one thing inside of it. And if you do want, you can have lists inside of lists as well. So maybe I have hello, goodbye, and I can make that a list. And the easiest way to do that is by putting our parentheses around them. And then here I could have bonjour and au revoir right there for, is au revoir one word or two words? I think it's two words. I grew up in learning French and I don't remember. So we can have that, and so I have my French list there and my English list there, for example. And both of those are lists inside of my another list right there. Maps are sort of like having named lists nested inside of your list. Let's start off by creating, let's get rid of all these actually to start with, and let's just do something really simple here. We're going to do my map name. And in here, parentheses, and put in our semicolon at the end. So right now it doesn't look like anything fancy, it's just pretty much a list at this point. Where things change though is inside our map we can create key value pairs. So in here I can write a key and a value, and if you're coming from another programming language this might look really familiar to you. So I have my key and my value right there. Now a lot of the time you're not just going to have one written out like this, so it's really common to just create it and make it look like this, just because it's a little bit easier to see. So I can comma separate what I want. So I can have my key 2, value 2, comma, key 3, value 3. And we'll do a key for value 4. So I think you get the rough idea. Basically, we're creating a nested list. Just the syntax is a little bit different than what we've seen in the past. So let's take a look at a more realistic thing that you might see. So you maybe will have do colors like that. And my colors will be a list. So I'm going to open and close that. And then we'll come here and push return, because I'm going to have a few. I'm going to have my primary color, and this will be red. I always do the semicolon instead of a comma. We're going to have our secondary color, which will be pink. And we'll have our accent color, which will be turquoise, like that. So now I have named the different parts that are inside of color. Now, where it's a little bit complicated, or where it goes like, how do I actually access this? Because I can't just put in, I can't say that my body has a background of color, because that, what does that even mean? So how do we get the different things that are in here? How would I do that? So luckily, Sass comes with a pre-built function for us that we can use called map_get. So this is the easiest way to do it. The only sad thing is it's kind of annoying to write. So here I can keep that, and what I do is I write map_get. So with map_get, the first thing we want to do is write in the name of the map we want. So the name of my map is color, and that should probably be colors because there's lots of colors. So let's make both of those plural. So I'm going to go into my colors map, and then what am I going to get from it? So I put a comma, and then I write what I want. So I want to get my secondary. So let's save that, and let's go and look at the CSS file that just generated for me. So you can see that my body has the pink background on it. So I can come into here and change that to accent, hit save, and now my background is turned into the turquoise. So that's how we can get it. This is not a fun way to write things though. I personally find this makes it harder to use a map than anything else because it's kind of long to write. But luckily there's ways that we can create that make it a little bit easier to get values out of maps. So writing this whole map_get with our value and key here, every time we want to get a value out of a map is annoying. And we can fix this by creating our own function. Yeah, we can create our own functions. We don't have to use the ones that Sass is giving us. And this does seem like a lot of work. Create a function just to make it more easy to access a map value when I could just have it written out on its own. I mean, Kevin, what the hell, right? Is that what you're thinking? You're going like, why would I want to go to all this trouble when I can just set up a simple list and then it's going to be a lot easier? I resisted Sass maps for the longest time just because of this. I said, why would I want to use a map and then have to make a function to make my life easier to get into my map and to do stuff with my map? It just didn't seem to make much sense to me. It seemed like a big waste of time. I would just use normal variables and be happy with it. And to be honest, on smaller projects, it might very well be. Though once you create these functions once, you have them and you can just import them into all your projects. So we're going to make it now, you're going to have it. You can always use a small, big project. It doesn't matter after this. And the reason we want to do this is maps have a lot of value, and you're going to see how awesome they can be really soon. For now, though, you just have to trust me on this. It's all going to be worth it. So let's stick with this map that we've already created. But make it easier for me to be able to access it than writing out map_get every time. So to do this, we're going to make a function. So we're going to do the So we're going to do at function. And I can create any name for my function I want. I want the least keystrokes possible, so I'm going to do CLR for color. You could also write out color. You can literally name this anything you want as long as it's not one of the pre-existing ones. And in here, I'm going to put in a variable called key. So what do I want to happen? When I use this function, I want it to return something. So I'm going to do at return map get colors key. So let's break this down a little bit. Basically, I was already doing this every single time. I was always, or I would have had to have been doing this every time, where I'd have to be doing a map get, writing in colors, and then writing in the key that I want. It's very repetitive. We're doing it over and over and over again. And well, that would be kind of annoying, right? So we don't want to have to be writing all that over again. The only thing that would ever change would be what I write here. Would I be writing primary, secondary, accent, or any of the other colors that I might have in here? I probably would be. So because this is the only thing that's changing, I can create this function that's going to change this word to whatever I need it to be whenever I use it. And the rest of this is always going to be there. And it's going to spit out whatever this would end up being, whether I write in primary, secondary, accent, or something else right here. So now what I can do is I can come down and say my body has a background of CLR. And in there, I just write in the value that I want, primary. I'll save that. And let's go check if it's working. And my background is red. I can come back and change this to accent. Save that, and my background has changed over to turquoise. So I said it's a little bit of setup to actually get it to work. It's not that much setup. It is a little bit, but it's pretty simple. So once again, I realize this seems a bit contrived at the moment. You know, I could just be writing this out, or I could just be using my variables. But this is a really nice, simple setup. Did that take us much time? No, it took 5 seconds to really do it once, I explained it, so maybe 20 seconds. But we're going to see there are a lot more to maps than just this. This is just sort of scratching the surface. So this type of thing, it just gets more and more powerful, and you're going to start really falling in love with them soon. At least I think so. So do you remember when we had listception? Well, we can have mapception too. Just like with lists, we can have maps nested inside of maps. So here I have my map that I've sort of set up something for. So I could come in here and I could write submap, and I could make another key value, and then I could come in and add another one. So I could come in here and do a submap 2, and I'm purposely making a mistake just in case you're screaming at me right now. Key value. And the reason I made a mistake here is just don't forget right here we need a comma. So just like here where I'm comma separating all my key value pairs, I need to do the same thing down here if I'm doing this submapping. If you don't do this, it causes an error. I've done that so many times. I don't care to admit it. So just make sure you don't forget the comma in between submaps if ever you're creating them. Sticking with the whole theme of color schemes, this is a way that you could create a more robust color scheme. So instead of the primary, secondary accent that we had before, this could be colors again. Colors. But instead of here, I could put this is my primary, and I could have a light, a normal, and a dark value. Let's just say this is burgundy. This one can be red, and this one can be pink. Did I misspell burgundy? I thought you could write burgundy like that. I'll leave it. We'll see if we get an error after. And then here on this one, so this could be my secondary. This could be, again, I'll just copy this because we're going to do a light, a normal, and a dark again. So my light one can be light blue. Whoops. Light blue. My normal one can be blue. And this one can be a dark blue. Dark blue. And now I have my primary, which has 3 different shades, and my secondary, which has 3 different shades. So how do we access our nested map values? Well, our get function works here, but we actually have to do it twice to get a value out of this. So here, if I wanted to set, say, my body's background to my dark blue, I would have to do something kind of crazy. I'm going to do color is map get, and in my map get, I need to do another map get. So I want to be looking at my colors, and I want to be looking at my secondary. And here I would want to be writing down, I said I wanted dark blue, so I'd write dark. So this is kind of weird, but let's look at it for a second. This here is going to be pulling out we're doing a map get. So this big map get, we're going to ignore the whole big thing there. For now, we're just going to look at this one here. So what this map get is doing is it's diving into my colors, and it's going and grabbing secondary. So basically what that's doing is just writing, it's setting that up. So now we're inside of here. So this one is setting us up so we're inside of this map. Then this one is looking now inside of this map, and it's going, okay, let's find the dark value, and it's finding that there. So if I hit save, I get an error, of course, because here I wrote color, and here I wrote colors. So let's just put that with our S and save it again. And there we go, I have my dark blue. So we can get inside of there. And yeah, if we thought the first one was a little contrived, this obviously looks a little bit worse. But yes, just like before, we can make this a little bit easier. So yeah, this is something I would never ever want to write. And it seems a little bit crazy. So in this case, let's go back to that color function that we already created. And so I'm going to do at function CLR. And in here, what we did, we said we're going to have a key. Then what we did is, whoops. So we said we'd have a key, and then we said it would return our map get, and it was returning colors, colors, comma, key. So that's what we had before, and it worked really well. So we want to be able to, instead of this though, we want something that's going to replace this here. So once again, we're going to need a double map get. So how this is going to change is we don't only have one value here, because in this one, I have my colors, which is always going to be colors because I'm always getting a color. But in this case, this one will change and this one will change. So we can keep our key here. Our key is looking at primary, secondary, that type of thing. And then we're also going to need to have a shade. So the first one is looking at here, and then we're going to jump in and grab the second value, and we can write in the shade that we want to have. So in here, we're going to have our map get and our map get. So basically, actually, just to make life easier, let's copy this right here and paste it in here. And let's delete this because we'll change it in a second. So here we have our map get, map get. We always want it to go into colors, but here we're going to have it look for our key. And here we're going to have it look for our shade. So now if I come on here, I can say color, and I want my primary dark. Save that, and I have my burgundy. And burgundy I don't think is a real color. Or I misspelled it or something. Or I can change this over to secondary light, and I get my light blue. You can see how this could be really nice if you have a big color scheme. Just writing color, secondary light, accent, extra dark, things like that. You could come up with a really nice, robust color scheme, and this would just work super, super well and give you a lot of options. The one thing that could be annoying is what if I wanted my normal? The normal, I'm guessing, would be the one you'd use the most. So if I did secondary normal, it's going to work, but that's the normal one. Defining normal each time could be annoying. It makes sense that if you want to change it from the regular secondary or the normal secondary to a light or a dark, then you'd want to come in here and modify it. But to be able, we can make it so we don't even have to write normal. I can just write secondary, and if I only write that, it's going to give me the normal value. So before I show you how to do it, just take a few seconds to think about it. Pause the video, see if you can think of a way that this, if I save that now, it's going to give me an error. It can't find an argument for shade, so it's not working. So take everything we've learned and pause the video for just a second and see if you can figure out a way to make that work without getting an error and having it output the normal if I put in my primary or secondary right here. Okay, so I hope you did that, or at least took the time to think about it a little bit. So here on the shade, all I need to do is put in normal. So this is a lot like when we were using mix-ins, right? On our mix-ins, we could put in our optional values and our, well, they called them optional arguments. So it's the same idea here. So now if I have color secondary and I save that, look at that, it worked. And if I switch that over to primary and I save that, it worked. And if I do add a comma and put in light, it will switch over to the light. So hopefully by now you're starting to buy into this maps thing a little bit and you're starting to see the point of it, and it just gets better from here. So do you remember this media query mix-in that we created a while back? That was pretty useful, and maps can make it even better. So taking a look at what we had created last time, we made a mix-in for all the different sizes that we might want to have. So we had to create a mix-in just pretty much for all the different breakpoints we want, and we created a custom mix-in at the end. So if we wanted a size that didn't fit with those, we could use that instead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to the top here and I'm going to create a map using those same breakpoints. So I'm going to write in breakpoints, put in my parentheses, and come in there and push return to start a new line. And we have our medium, which was 600 pixels. We had our large, which is 960 pixels. And we need our px, and my extra large, which was 1200 pixels. And you can leave a trailing comma at the end of this if it's easier, so that way if you do come to make a new one, you hit return and then I could put like small or whatever, and you don't forget to put a comma. So if you want to leave a trailing comma at the end, you're allowed to. With these, it won't cause any errors. Just something I don't think I mentioned earlier on. So now instead of having to make all these different mix-ins, what we can actually do is we can do one big mix-in. So in here, I'm going to do an at mix-in. I'm just going to call it media query, and we're going to put in a size. Size. So in here with my size, we can add in, I'm going to create a variable called breakpoint. So I'm going to have my breakpoint, and then I want to use the breakpoint pretty much to automatically. So I'm going to do at media, screen, and min width is breakpoint. And in there we have our at content. So I've pretty much taken this, but I'm adding in this variable which will get changed depending on the size that I put in. So the size would be me writing in something like extra large, large, or medium, or whatever other size I might write in there. So I'm going to be using map get to do this. So if you want to pause and think about this just for 1 second, I'd encourage it to think about how we could get the values out of here to turn into this variable that I'm using here. So I hope you did pause and just think about it, or maybe you figured it out in that short amount of time that I just went quiet for. We're going to be using the map get. So my map get, I want to get, I want to go for my map, which is breakpoints. And this will be size. So let's break all this down for a second, and actually let's just delete this because we don't need that right now. Now the one thing this isn't going to work for is the custom size. It's only going to work for ones that are inside of our breakpoints. So if we look at this, the way it is working is this is exactly the same as what we had, but we have this variable breakpoint. So my variable breakpoint is my map get of breakpoints and size. So breakpoints, it's always going to come and look into my breakpoints map that I have here. And then the size is the one I write. So if I write large, it's going to turn into 900. This will become 960 pixels. Remember, this is the key, and this is the value. Whatever comes out of this map get is the value for that key. So I'm putting in extra large, I'm getting 1200 pixels. So let's see if this is working. So if I do body, background red, and then I do my at include MQ, and in here I write medium, and I'll write in background blue. I should be able to save that and go and take a look. And there we go, it worked. And that is coming out to the 960. And we can add another one at include media query large. Background is green. Save that, go take a look, and there it's at the 960 pixels. So I see that it's all working, and that's a nice handy way that we can take something that we've already looked at creating and make it a little bit easier. It also lets me easily add new breakpoints without having to create a new mix-in. Everything is all in one mix-in here. It also makes it easier for me to know what my breakpoints are, because I don't have to go and look at all my different mix-ins to see it. All of them are stored in one place. It also makes it much easier to change them if ever I need to change these at any time. We don't always have to use the map_get function or a function that we create ourselves with the map_get in it to access our maps. There's other ways to get in there and use the values that we've set up inside our map. So here I have my font sizes that I've set up, and I've put all my font sizes that I might be using on my site like that. So we can use the controlled. Another way we can do it is with our control directives. So here I've set up this little font sizes map with my H1 to H4 and my P. And so what we can do is I can use my each control directive. So we can say each tag and size in font sizes. So we want to look at our tags. So I have H1, H2, H3, H4, and P. So those are my tags. And right there, I think is pretty obvious that it is my sizes. So for each one of those, we want to do a couple of things. We're going to have to use a little bit of iteration here because we want to take our tag and we want to put the font size as size. So if I save that, we can see here I have my H1 all the way down to my P, and it's all been set up for me. So that's a nice way we can set something up like that. So that works nicely, but it probably isn't something you'd want to implement into a real project just because we didn't really save a lot of time. So it might have been a little while ago. But you may remember that we created an each loop to cycle through some links. So this is what we created. We made a list of, we made a few nested lists here for my different links, and then we had our each loop go through all of those and export. So if I save that and I go and look, it gave us something that looked like this. So that was super handy. And while this is really nice, it's even better with maps. So right now, if someone were to stumble across this and see links, they would guess that what each one was for, but it's not terribly obvious, especially the name, the whole like normal, important, external. They might not know exactly how those are being used. And also, what happens if I also want one of these ones to be uppercase? Well, let's start by turning this links here that we have into a map instead. And I think in this case, it would be easier just to delete the whole thing and start over. So we're going to make it into a map. So I'm going to do something like that and come inside. And we have our normal. So my normal links, and my normal links have a color of purple and a font weight of normal. Then I have, and don't forget this comma. I'm going to say that a lot because it's important as I do my important one here. Color of red and a font weight of bold. And once again, don't forget your comma here. And we can come in on our next one, which would be my external link, external. And this one here had a color of green and a font weight of normal. So it takes a little bit longer to set up just because it's not all like just comma, comma, comma. You do have to do a little bit more work at this point here. But one advantage of this is if I were to open up another person's project and it had this, I'd instantly understand what's going on, or even one of my own projects. I've had ones where I've opened where I used the old one and I had to go and figure out what I was doing. Here, I think I have normal links, important links, external links, and then I see their exact settings that they have right here. Now let's try and make an each loop that's going to cycle through our map. I'm not really worried about the functionality of it yet. I just wanted to get through this map that I've created. So I'm going to take this and delete the whole thing. And we're going to do an... So if we look at the old one, we had our link name, our color, our weight in links. So actually, I think we can keep that exactly how we had it. I think what we're going to change now, for now, let's just keep the text decoration of none on there like this, and hit save on that. So if I do that and I come in and I look, I just have normal link, important link, and external link, none, none, none. So let's just break this down really fast to remember how this is working. So I want to get the link name, so my normal, my important, or external for each one of them. And then I want to use that to put right here. And then I want to, and actually, I don't like how I did this the first time. I'm going to take this off and do link and put it here, link name. Just because this is going to give us link hyphen normal, link hyphen important, link hyphen external. And I think that just makes it easier easier to read and understand when you're seeing the outputted CSS. If ever you're looking at the output CSS, I guess. So then we want to get the name for each one of them, and then we also want to have the color and the weight associated with it, and we want to be looking inside of our links the whole time. Now this was the old way that we had it. This time I'm going to shorten this up, and I'm going to shorten this up to be properties. So I'm going to save that. And to understand what we're doing here, I wanted to go through each one of my links, so my normal, my important, and my external. From there, what I want it to do is I want it to also get the set of properties that it has. So I want it to get the color and the font weight for each one of them pretty much. And that would be my properties, and it's inside of my links map here. Now, there's a reason that I switched this to properties instead of having color and font weight, and this is because we have nested lists. We have the advantage of being able to grab all of the properties that are in here. So right now they all have 2. So before I was getting color, font weight, color, font weight, color, font weight. But what if we wanted to have one of them has 7 properties and one of them only still has 2? We didn't really work with our each loop last time. Now we'll be able to do that. The one thing is, if I omit the properties, if I save this and we go and look just really fast, you can see it's working. Link, link name, link, link name. Whoops, I made a mistake there. I forgot the $sign. Save. Link normal, link important, link external. So we see it's working. If I take the properties off of here and I save, it actually will break because it's treating, you can see here it says color, purple, font weight, normal isn't a valid CSS value because it's trying to take this whole thing and it doesn't understand what that is. So it is important that I have the properties so it knows this is the first thing it's taking, and then it's going to treat the rest of that separately, and it's going to treat that as the properties. So we have it working now, but I need it to access my individual properties. I'm going to do that in the next video. Before you hit next and you jump in there, hit the pause button and try and figure this out on your own. And do hit the pause button because it's going to autoplay if not. So I'm treating this like a mini challenge. And I know you're tempted to skip ahead and get the answer right away since it's just seconds away. But you're taking this course to learn. Push yourself. See if you can figure it out on your own before you continue. I'll wait a few seconds to give you one last second to pause here. And remember, we just want to be able to get, how are we going to take this with what we've looked at so far and actually have it spit out exactly what we need, and also have it work if I have a text transform uppercase on this one. So if I add that in there, I want this to work every single time. Did you figure it out? Don't feel bad if you didn't. This is a tricky one. We actually have to run a separate add each inside of the first one. We used our links here to grab the name of each one of our lists, our normal, important, and our external. And then we grabbed the whole properties thing. So we're grabbing this whole thing right here. But we need to be able to cycle through everything that's inside of this. We can't treat this like one big thing. We now have to go and get the key and the value for each individual thing in here. And sometimes there might be 2, and sometimes 3, or other times maybe 10 different things inside of one of these maps that's nested inside of our links map. So basically, all this is inside of our properties that we have right here, and we need to break that up into more pieces. So we can keep our text decoration none, and then let's come and add at each. So for each property and value in properties. And again, these first two, like this and this, I'm making up. These are my own names. Just like here, this and this are just things that make sense to me. The most important part is this one here. So this properties is going and coming from this one here, and this properties is this whole thing here. So we really are in a bit of mapception here. And just like this links is actually, in this case, finding this one here. But just remember, this properties is looking at what is this, and this one here, we have my link name, and then it's this part following it there. So it's this whole area. So that's what properties is referring to. So now I want to get every key that's inside of there and the value for every key that's inside of there. So we're for each property, so each one of these, and value here inside of this. And then we'll do the same thing for this one, and then we'll do the same thing for this one. So for each property, value, and properties, we want to take the property and output the value. Does that make sense? So I want color red to be printed, and font weight bold, and text transform uppercase. I want each one of those to be printed. And just remember here, I am using interpolation, because the only time you can have a variable spit out properly is if it's a value. If it's not a value, you have to use interpolation to get it to print out. This has a big advantage over our original at each that we created. Last time we were using a list and it was limited. This time, because we're using a map and we're looping through all the properties inside of that map, we aren't limited to how many we use. Just like here, I added a third one. And if I wanted to, I could add a fourth, a fifth, and a sixth. And you'll see really where this is going to come into handy soon. So I'm going to save that, and we'll come and look, and you can see that it spat out all this, and this extra one has the text transform on it. So that's really nice. But I can come back here. And the reason this is nice is I've had to create this, and this did take a little bit of time to set up and a little bit of thinking. Remember though, once you've set this up on one project, you can come back to it all the time. Maybe you need to tweak it to make it work. So it's important you understand what's going on here. But the advantage with it is now we can be really organized with what we're doing here. So now maybe I'm going to come and say, well, I also have a call to action link that I'm going to want. And well, it's going to be it's just going to be white. So we can go and look at that. I have my call to action, the text decoration, none, and the color of white on it. Maybe it's white because the call to action just always has a really dark background or something like that. So I can come in here and create new links really, really fast and easily with their name and all the properties that I want it to have, and it's going to output all the code with the advantage of text decoration always being on there, and maybe there's something else that you always want put on there, so you just include that in here before or after this each loop. And it just makes looking at your CSS or your SAS file really easy when you're coming into it to make changes, or if somebody else is working on it, because it's really clear what's going on here. It's nice and organized. All your links are together, and it's, I think, a nice way to do it. Again, this is something you'd probably be doing on larger projects. If you had a simple site that only had 3 different types of links and they don't have too many shared properties, you might not want to take the time to set this up. But you can imagine on a large project, this can be really, really beneficial. There's a built-in function called the map has key function. So that would be the map has key, like that. Now this function lets us debug our maps really easily. So let's take a look at the very, very basics of it. So here we can have something like my map, and we'll create a really simple example map here. So key 1, value 1, and key 2, value 2. And make sure, whoops, that you are using commas and not semicolons. So with my map there, now we can say element, and I can say if map has key. So here we want to put the map name, so my map, and we put in the key that we're looking for. So if the map has the key that I'm looking for, we can have content map has this key, and we can throw in an else statement on here. Else content is map doesn't have this key. And of course, I shouldn't have put that there. So there we go. So we can do something like that. And it's obviously a really basic example. So in this case, the content would print out as map doesn't have this key. So if I go and look at that, we can see here that map doesn't have this key. So if we come back, my map does not have something called key, so it doesn't have it. And if I change this over to key 1, save, now map has this key. So it can do something like that. Now that's not really how we'd want to be using it, but it can be useful for debugging every now and then. So let's look at a bit more of a realistic example in the next video. So let's say we have a map for some colors and we want a function to easily get colors from it, like we've already seen. So if I come on here and I say h2, my color is color primary, we can see that prints out red, and that's great. But what if I come on here and instead of that, I write in main? Well, just nothing prints. That is super frustrating. So what we can do is we can use our map has key function to first make sure our key exists. If the key exists and it works, we have nothing to worry about. But if it doesn't exist, we can have it throw an error. Remember errors? They come in very handy when you're doing your custom functions, and especially when it comes to going through maps. It can just be a lifesaver. So let's start by having it check to see if the map has a key to start with. So before we do anything else, we can come on here. So we can say if map has key, and we're going to say colors because we're checking our colors map. And this is really specific because this one is just to get colors out of here. That's the whole point of this function. So we want to check if that one has the key. So if colors has the key that I entered here, then everything can work fine. So we can just wrap all this up in something like that. But if it doesn't have one, else error. And our error could be this map does not have that key. Save that. And you can see that threw an error because this doesn't exist. And if I switch this over to primary, it's coming out to red. Let's go back to this main thing for a second though, because I think we can improve this a little bit. This map does not have that key. It's really, really vague. It could come and we could figure it out. We can see I put in main and I can come and okay, you know, we'll figure out what's actually going on. But we could say instead of this map, we could say that our colors map does not have the, and put a bit of interpolation here, the key, and save that. So colors map does not have the main key, just at least to make it a lot more obvious what happened, because it is possible you write a whole bunch of stuff along the way. You put in, you know, you did all your typography, you have a whole bunch of stuff you put in. You don't want it throwing up like a simple just, oh, you put in something wrong. You want to tell them exactly what they did wrong. So this could just make it a lot easier to do. So you remember this that we made, our mix-in for media queries? I want you to take this mix-in that we've created here, and I want you to see if you can figure out how to use the map has key in here to throw an error if ever somebody puts in a custom size. So, or not a custom size, but something that anything that doesn't exist. So if they try putting in small, I want it to print out an error that is very clearly saying that the small doesn't exist inside of the breakpoints media query. So give that a try, and in the next video, we'll look at the solution on how to do it. All right, so let's take a look at the solution to how we can do this, and the code is in a file down below as well if you want to get to it. So basically what we want to do is wrap everything we've already done inside of our if statement. So if map has key, so we want to see if the breakpoints map has the size that we entered, then we want to do everything that we've already written here. So just take all that, and we're good to go. But if it doesn't have that, else error, the breakpoints map does not have the key of size. Save. And we can go and check. The breakpoints map does not have the key of small. Let me just break that off to the side there. So just to check, I can make this large and it should work still. Of course. Let's include large body color red. So that's working. So large is working. We'll do once again small, and that should throw us an error right there. So the breakpoints map does not have the key of small, and then we get the rest of our explanation. Alrighty, so here I have created a map with a whole bunch of key value pairs and just value 1 through 8, and I've put different things in here. And I have a little comment next to it saying what each one of those is. So 100 or 100 pixels or 5em, those all come out as numbers. Something like hello is a string, as is hi there with the quotation marks around it. True is going to be a Boolean, and 345 and red are both colors right there. We can use, as I mentioned in the last video, the function type of to see what each one of these is. So we can have Sass figure it out. For each value and key in values, we want to take the name. We want to take the name, and we want the content to be type of, and we can get the key here. And I put name. I don't know why I wrote name there. This should be value. So the value here and the key on that side, and it's just going to come out. So let's see value 1 through 8 as my class name, and then instead of 100, 105, we should have number listed out there. So let's save that file and go check out what we have. So number, string, Boolean, color. Perfect. Exactly what I wanted to have come out there. So I can see that that is actually working. Okay, so everything we have here we want to keep. We just need to add a little something to it. So we want to say if this is true, we want it to work anyway. So that's going to stay the same, and we still want our error. But in between these, I'm going to push that down to add in something else. So I'm going to add in an else if. So hopefully you remembered about this. So else if, I want to evaluate the type of. So I want to evaluate the type of size. So I want to know, we're going to look at the type of size, and if type of size is a number, we want something to happen. So if it is, then we want to take in this exact same thing, copy, paste, except this will be size. So the first one here is what we were already doing. Now, if that was true, it ends there. It doesn't matter, it's going to work. If this wasn't true, it's going to come down and look at this. So now it's going to go, well, it wasn't in my, it wasn't part of my map, but let's check this size now. Is the size a number? Yes. Okay, now we can use it, use that as our media query instead. And if it's not a number, and if it's not in our map, then we can have it finally print the error. So if I save this and we go and check at the compiled solution, we can see that it's actually working. Screen with 50em with 960 pixels. And just let's add one more in here, copy that, paste, and just to make sure it's still working with our large. And we can see that it's also still working with our large right there. Now there is one issue with this as it stands now, and that's if I put in a number with no unit, save, and we go look again, min width of 50. And well, that's a problem. So in the next video, we're going to look at how we can also fix that. Okay, so as this is now, it is working great, but as we just saw, if I strip a unit out and I hit save, I get the problem of it still working. So the solution to this, there are different ways you could approach it to make it work, but I'm going to try and make it as simple as possible. And what I want to show you, we're going to use the little debug here, and this is where the debug thing can really be handy. So debug, and it's a built-in Sass function called unitless. And what it does is it checks whether or not a unit is unitless. So in here you can put anything you want. So I could put in, say, 50 and hit save. Because it's debug, it's not going to print into my CSS file. It's going to print into the command line. Oh, and I forgot to put my semicolon there. So debug, and you can see it's printing to true. So it's true that 50 is unitless, and I'm going to put 50px there. And now it's coming out to false because it's not unitless. So this unitless will always print out a true or a false based on the unit that is inside of it. So what I want to do now, we can get rid of this. We can use that unitless up here when we're checking. So we want to see if type of size is a number, and we also want to check if it's not unitless. So to do that, if you remember back, we can do and not unitless, and we do have to put the size back in there. So it's going to see if it's true that it has the size and if it's not unitless. So let's save that again now, and we can go and check over here, and we can see that it's not working. Now the only problem is my error is too generic now. So the breakpoints map does not have a key for 50. That doesn't really make any sense with this. There are kind of two options here. You could actually do this as an else if and check and have it print an error if it is unitless, and then go through again. And if it's not unitless, you could build all of, you could hold inside of this else if, you could have another else if to check for the unitless or not and print an error in relation, which would probably be a bit more practical in the long run. But I think for these purposes, it would just make it look really complicated, and we could just change the error here to say that the MQ mixin requires either a number with a unit or a key from breakpoints you entered. And once again, a little bit of interpolation, size. Save that. So it's a really long error, obviously, but the MQ mixin requires either a number with a unit or a key from breakpoints. You entered 50. I think that, it's a long error. Again, it might be better if you build in an error for if in here with another is-elf. But for me, I prefer in this situation just keeping this part a little bit simpler and easier to understand if ever I have to come back to it, or if someone else is looking at it. I think this is easier to come into the mixin at a later date. Partials are an essential part of Sass. Normally you learn about them early on because they're fairly simple to use, but I've held off on them. Why? Well, I didn't want to focus on file organization early on in this course. I wanted to focus on learning the ins and outs of Sass. But now, with all the big stuff out of the way, we can tackle file organization, which is effectively what partials are all about. It's just making a ton of smaller Sass files and then getting them combined into one giant CSS file. It helps us stay a bit more organized with our files. Instead of having to just have one giant CSS or Sass file that you're scrolling up and down through trying to find what you're looking for, once you figure out your organizational method, it makes you work a lot faster. Now, we tell Sass that a file is a partial by starting its name with an underscore. And when we do this, we're telling Sass, don't compile this file into a CSS file. I want to import it somewhere else instead. I've set up this folder, so my main has nothing in it, but I have a nav here that has stuff in it and a footer here. And if we take a look, we can see that my Sass is being compiled. So I am generating and I'm watching for changes. And let's say I make a change here. Let's just change my font weight to 300 and I hit save. Well, there we go. They have a little success there. It did check and it did notice that I made a change, but it's seeing that this is an underscored file, so it's not actually doing anything with it. If I rename this without the underscore and I save my file, you'll see it made right here, right away, it made a footer and with my footer map there. And if I go and look at that, I can see in my footer.css, it's compiled that in, which I don't really want to do. So let's come and delete and delete, just because I don't want those, obviously. And let's rename this back to have the underscore in front. There we go. So now when I make saves to these, nothing is happening. And this is for good reason too, because imagine if you had, there's a reason we don't make 100 CSS files like this when we're working. We work on one CSS file. Imagine if you made 20, 30 CSS files and then having to link to them all. It's a lot of HTTP requests, and it's just annoying. Even if you're not worried too much about HTTP requests, you have HTTP2 going and it's fine. It's still annoying to have to link to everything. You want to link to one file. So how we can do that is if I go to my main, I can come in here and I can say import nav and import footer. And on those, and now if I hit save, we can see that it gets compiled and I have this nice big file there where it has everything in there. So you can see I have all my nav stuff and I have my footer right there. Now you may have noticed two things. I didn't include the underscore when I wrote this, and I didn't include the extension. You can include them if you prefer, but you don't have to, and less keystrokes is better, right? Sass assumes you're importing partials, so you don't have to put the underscore. And it also assumes it's either a Sass or a CSS file, so you don't need the extension either. And one really cool thing with this is, if you had a file that was a Sass, and let's just add another one in here so I can show you. So if I didn't add import, I won't save this yet because I won't have the file. We'll just call it Sass. If I come in and I make a new file in here, underscore sass.sass, so instead of an SCSS file, it's an SASS file. Body, whoops, I'm so used to writing it like that. Color green, background red, hit save on that. Come back to my main, save on that, and we should have my body right there. So even though this one is a Sass file and this one is an SCSS file, it doesn't matter, it still works. Order matters. And this is really important. The order that you place your files in when you import them is the order that they're going to come into your CSS file. So you might have noticed first was all my nav stuff, then my new body, and then my footer at the bottom. So if I take my footer here and I import that first, now the footer is moved all the way to the top of my CSS file instead of being at the bottom of my CSS file. Now, for some things like this, it doesn't really matter. But if you're going to be using variables, and mixins and functions and anything like that, well, then it's really important. Just to demo this, let's add a variable to my footer file. So let's come in here and I'll make a BG color and we'll just have that one be black. And here, black, BG. Save that, and of course it's still working the way you'd expect it to. Now, I could come into my nav and say, well, I want the background of this to be the same color. Background is BG. I can save that, and now you can see that the background has been added to here and everything is fine. But most of the time, I tend to import my footer lower down after my nav just because of the natural progression of things. And if I save that now, oh my goodness, look at this. I got an error. Undefined variable BG. Well, how will I have an undefined variable? I define that. Oh, I define that variable in my footer. Sass is just like CSS. it's red top to bottom. So as SAS starts compiling, it gets to my variable that's in my nav, and it sees something that it's never seen before, and I get an error. It doesn't keep looking to see if it's going to come across that variable later on. Now, as we saw before, if I had my footer first, it fixes the problem because the variable exists when we get to my nav here. A better solution, though, instead of just having stuff put in willy-nilly, is to bring all of your variables, mixins, and functions, have them all imported before everything else that could be compiled into actual CSS. So a really basic example here would just be to have an @import variables _ variables.scss, and I would move this into here. Oops, I forgot my semicolon. So if I save all of these now, everything is going to be working. Now the order of these don't matter because as long as my variable is imported first, and the interesting thing with that is if I delete all of this, it's not actually compiling any CSS, but it's making my variable accessible. And this is what's really important, and that's why usually we import our variables, our mixins, our functions first before anything that can be compiled, because then you know you won't run into an error of the files not, the variables or whatever it is not being accessible. All of that comes in first, and then we get all of our regular stuff afterwards. One of the biggest issues with partials is coming up with a good way to organize your files. I'm going to give you my advice on it, and there are tons of articles online that talk about it as well, and each person has their own folder and file names. The trick is to come up with something that works for you, and of course, which is logical. You want someone else to be able to pick it up and try and figure it out. When I look at someone else's system, I usually go, yeah, I can see how they work with that. The one you're going to see the most often is the 7-1 system. So the 7-1 system looks something like this. You tend to have 7 folders, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 folders that all get imported into one main file. As far as I can tell, this is the original one, but I'm really not so sure. If you type it in, you'll get SAS Guidelines comes up first, which is a really nice resource. But there's a whole bunch that come after that, and each one has their own folder names and file names in there. And honestly, when you first look at this, it can look overwhelming. But project size matters. The thing is, really massive projects will have very complicated file structures. There's lots of different pieces going on. Smaller projects tend to have simpler ones. And that's why we're going to start with a small project, and then we're going to work on a bigger one after. Now here on my side, I have my system that I'm going to show you. I think my system makes a lot of sense, and it's based heavily on this 7-1. But of course I think it makes sense because it's what I use. It's really similar to the other ones you're going to find, though I do name things a little bit differently. Just for an example, I don't use utils, I use abstracts instead, but you'll see other people who use abstracts, and anyway, you'll see when I start diving into it. I encourage you to follow along with what I'm doing, at least at the beginning, just because if you don't have experience with it. But as time goes on, try and develop your own system a little bit. It took me forever to get settled down with what I have here. And while I'm happy with what I have now, it doesn't mean it's perfect. It doesn't mean you might not have something better or something that just works better for you. Also, if you're working with other people, you're going to have to get used to the way other people work. And hopefully they just have a nice organized system. The way I work is I usually have my SAS or SCSS folder, and in there I have my main.scss. You can also call that style.scss. You'll see app.scss. This is just importing all of the different files that I have. Generally for the subfolders, I have 4, sometimes 5. I don't go up to 7 most of the time. So I usually have my abstracts, my base, my components, my layout, and sometimes the vendor. So this is part of a project that we will be working on together pretty much next, as soon as we get through the partials, because I don't like dealing with abstract concepts. A lot of the time you'll be reading about it, they're going to show you the file system they use, but they don't actually show you the files that are in there, and without seeing that, it can be hard to understand how it's being used. So I'm going to break down my system a bit, and then we're going to jump in and make this project, so you're actually going to see it in use and hopefully understand sort of my approaches, and I'll definitely be talking more about how I'm organizing my files also when we're building this out together. So my abstracts folder here at the top, This contains all my variables, mixins, and functions, and all that stuff. I like splitting it up like this. So you'll see I have my colors, and it just has my colors. I have my functions, my mixins. So it has all of the things that don't get compiled. So colors, functions, general, mixins, and typography are generally the files I end up with in here. You'll see other people, instead of having colors and functions in general, they'll have a variables file. And one variables file has everything. If that makes more sense to you, go for it. I like having my colors and not my colors and functions, my color and my type separate, because when I'm working, if I need to reference back to one of these, and this is a really simple one, as I said, we're starting on a smaller project, but sometimes I have a lot of stuff in my typography and I have a fair amount of stuff in my colors, and so I want to just be able to reference it right away. I don't want to have to open my variables and then scroll to what I need. If you think it makes more sense to have a variables file and everything in there, that's completely fine. My mixins is all my mixins, my functions are my functions, and this general file is any variables that didn't fit into my colors or my typography, just all the random extra stuff that's left over. In my base folder here, it's a little lonely right now. I just have my typography. So you'll notice I have typography here, and I have typography here. Some people don't like the fact that the names are the same. For me, it doesn't bother me. So if this does bother you, maybe you'll want to come up with a different naming system, but I know this is my abstracts. So I know this is just going to be full of variables, or I might have a map and stuff like that, but I won't have any actual rules in here. And I know that this one's in my base, so I know that this is all of my actual typography that's being used on my site. It's generally a bare bones folder. It's usually, well, I always have my typography in here, and if I have a reset, it'll go in here too. I used to put my general layout stuff here too as well, but I've since moved that to the layouts folder because it's layout stuff, right? Moving on, my components. My components, this is also bare bones at the moment for this project, but my components usually gets pretty full. This is all the components I might reuse in a project. So think of calls to action, cards, buttons, anything that gets reused throughout my site that isn't styled specifically to a single page or section. I also put my nav in there. I don't know why, it's just something I've always done. I know a lot of other people include that in the layout. I put my footer in the layout, but my nav in the components. It's the way I work. In my layout, this one, obviously you can see has a lot more friends in there. It's not all alone. So in my layout, I put in the specific layouts. So for this project, it's actually just a one-page design, so each section of the homepage has its own partial, but usually it'd be one for each page. So it's unique things to each page. I would give a different thing here, and I also have a general in here as well, which just gets my general stuff. So my box sizing, my setting, resetting my margin 0 on my body. If you put that over in your typography one here. A lot of the time I'll throw that just into here. But, setting general things that impact my entire site, but that doesn't really belong anywhere else. So I throw that in my general, and then each section or each page gets its own layout. Sometimes this is pretty bare bones as well. In this case, it got kind of populated for this project. Now I don't have a vendor folder here, but this would be used if I was using something like Bootstrap or Foundation, or even just bringing something in from somebody else. Somebody, if I was bringing in, say, a hamburger menu that had a cool animation on it that I really wanted to use, that would end up in my vendor folder, and then I'd be importing that into my project. From there, it's a folder for stuff that I didn't create. Someone else wrote it, and I'm just using it. And that is how I organize my projects. I hope it's a little bit of insight. I think it's going to be a lot more useful when we actually start building the project. I think you might get some more from it. But just as you're working through your stuff, try and think about smart and organized ways to do it. Just a word of warning, I mentioned this before, but it took me a long time to be comfortable with this system. The more you use it, the more comfortable you'll get. You realize that some things don't really make sense. You're going to move stuff around. You're going to use different names. You won't always know what to name things. It's sort of like naming classes. Sometimes it's really easy to have a class name, and other times it's a pain in the butt. So you have the same issue here as well. You'll get a system, and you're going to become more comfortable with it, and you're going to work faster like this than you do when you're just creating a giant file where you're scrolling up and down. You're used to that now, so there's a change that's going to happen, and sometimes the change is painful, and sometimes you have to be a little bit slower at the beginning. But then when you're like, oh man, I need to make a change to my H1, I just go to base, I go to typography, and I know my H1 is right there. I'm not scrolling going, I think that was 3/4 of the way up. I know exactly where to find what I'm looking for. So it makes it a lot easier. And just through the, you can do a Command F, we can do Command Shift F, or just hit this, and I can search through all of my open files. So I'm not losing any search functionality that I might have had before, just because I'm working with multiple files compared to one file. Hi, and welcome to this part of the course. You have covered a lot of material so far. It's been hours of content and lots of stuff. So really just congrats on even making it this far into the course. I know it's been a long one. There's been a lot of stuff we've learned, so it's finally time to start taking those things and building something pretty big with it and learning, getting used to using them now. So for this project, just to show you what we're going to be building, this is the site that we're going to be doing. We're going to be building in some media query, so it's going to work at smaller sizes. This has a nice little hover effect on it. So this is what we're building. There's links that will actually just scroll down, but it's all CSS only. I'm not using any JavaScript in this. So you can see that we can automatically scroll. And if we go and look at it at smaller screen sizes, there's a few differences. So we have our site that's now looking like this. It comes down, much simpler overall design, obviously at the small screen size. But we have a few little, fun things. The fonts, a few simple media queries to change font sizes at the different screen sizes and stuff. But we're gonna. Over here we turned off that hover effect because people are going to be on their phone. They won't be hovering on stuff. So a nice, not too complicated design, but something that's going to let us practice everything we've learned so far and push to make sure that you're comfortable with what we've learned so far, what you've learned so far. And put everything into practice. And the file organization for this one is not going to be too complicated. Now, before you get started on it, there is a file to download. I'm going to be talking more about all the stuff you're getting with that file in the next video. But if you want to follow along, just please make sure you don't skip that. You go ahead and download it. Look forward to building this site with you. So let's get started. All right, so let's get started on this project. I'm pretty excited about this one. So you probably already saw and hopefully downloaded the folder for this. And if you open up that zip file, what you'll get is a folder with the design and design specs, as well as an images folder. So just to look through quickly at what we're getting with those, if I look in the design specs, there's a PDF for the full screen design and the mobile design, and a markdown file that has some design specs in it. So if I come and look at that markdown file here, it just has, I have my colors, my typography, a very small layout thing, and my media queries. So I've just listed things out just to make it a bit easier for you. I'm going to have this off screen when I'm doing it, just because it's going to be a bit annoying for you to see me going back and forth a ton, but that's this is here for you just to make your life easier, so you don't have to write things in. You can go back and copy and paste. I've given you the Google import that I used in it, as well as the serif and sans serif fonts right there, so you can just copy and paste that as well. I've also given the font sizes and line heights that I'm going to be using when I am doing all of this, so all of that is there if you want to reference that as we're going. Layout, there's nothing really too big on the layout. It's just most things I'm using padding and gaps of 2em for everything all over the place. So I will be setting up a variable for that, just because it's such a commonly used number that I end up using in my design. Now you'll notice I only gave you 2 different designs, but there's 3 different media queries. So 0 to 450 pretty much, 450 to 860, and then 860 and bigger. Basically the small screen one that I gave you is this one, the big one is this, and we're gonna have a little middle ground just to solve some issues that we're gonna see that we will run into as we're going. So we create that little middle ground one just to solve some problems before we get to our big screen. Now, one thing I have been trying to do in my designs is limit my media queries as much as possible. Maybe I'm pushing things a bit too far, but I find with the way grid works, and especially a design like this, I don't find we need too many. One thing that's really important with this project is this is how I'm building it. If you want, you can take this and try and do the whole thing on your own without me, and then come back and watch how I've done it. Or you can try and do a section and then come back and see how I did that section. Or if you get stuck on some things or want to see different stuff, you can reference the course. Of course, you can just follow along with me as I'm doing it, but really, please build this out. It's a good practice for everything we've done, and I will be putting a lot of focus on the file organization because we've only briefly talked about that and we haven't really practiced it yet, so this will be a nice practice for our file organization. With all that out of the way, let's get writing some markup. So I'm going to be working directly in the folder here, but if you want to create your own folder or something else like that, without the design and design specs in there, by all means go for it. You could just, if you're putting it up somewhere, you could always put a git ignore or something on that file. Here let's make our index.html. And if you're using VS Code or if you have Emmet installed, you can just do an exclamation mark and then push tab, and you'll get in here everything that you need to start off, or most of the things we need here to start off. We can change our title, personal chef, and hit save on that, and we have a nice little starting point. The other thing I'm going to do while we're here is I'm going to link over to my style sheet. So that's going to end up in my CSS folder in a file called, I'm going to call mine main. If you call yours style, whatever it is, just make sure you're linking to where you're saving and the name of your CSS file. So let's hit save on that and we can start working. Okay, so here I have my navigation, which is on top of this. And so I think what I'm going to do is we'll just do a nav on its own, and my navigation is going to be, I'm just trying to think, my navigation will just go, I'll position it absolute, and it's going to go on top of this, which will be my sort of introduction hero type area. I think that would be the easiest way to do it. So I have my nav. Inside my nav, of course, we need a UL, and in there we're going to have my LI. My nav, I'm actually going to give this a class. I forgot to do that, a class of nav. And I know this sounds weird, but in general, I like selecting classes as much as possible. If you're someone who is really into BEM, you'd probably have nav, then nav list, and then nav list item, and then nav list link or something like that. Because of the way Sass works, I don't mind nesting things one deep, so I'll talk about that more once we get to styling up the nav, but this is how I approach my navigations. Ahref will be, we'll call this part home, and I'll just take this and copy and paste it. I'm not going to be using Emmet to do all this. Normally I would, but I just want to make it a bit easier for you guys to follow along, so I'm going to type everything out the long way. Home, or this would make a lot more sense. In most decent text editors, if you control or command click, you can place your cursor in multiple places. So I can just write about, that's not going to capitalize it, I'll have to fix that after, but that's okay. Home, about, meals, and testimonial. I guess that should be testimonials, not testimonial. And I should just come and capitalize. There we go. Awesome. We also need my logo to be in the middle, and I think the easiest way to do that is actually just to make this a list item as well. It could probably also be a link that would go to the home. Home. I'm using hashtags in front of all these because they will be, we're going to link, so when you click it, it clicks to it and goes. Home, about, and here we'll be putting my SVG. My SVG that I've supplied you is actually black, so either you could figure out a way to change it yourself, or we could come in, just copy this whole thing, and paste her in right there. Now it's really long, it's really annoying. I'm just going to actually do that so I can shrink that line down. So my SVG is only taking up one line, and instead of an ID of layer 1, I'm going to give a class of logo. That's going to let me control the size of it, and it's also going to let me change the color of it. So I can save that, and I have my SVG there inside of my navigation. If you were to look at this in the browser right now just to see if it's working, it's going to be massive. It's going to take up like a really big amount of space. Don't worry, we're going to fix that if you're looking at your changes as you're making them. Okay, so now we just have a whole bunch of sections to make. I'm going to do each one of these as its own section. So we can have a section class is equal to home. and ID is equal to home. The reason that I give it both the class and the ID is in my CSS, I like using only classes just to keep specificity the same all the time and equal, so I'm not fighting against IDs and trying to style things a little bit differently. And the ID, I'm just using it to create the link, so when someone clicks on that, it will go there. Inside of there, we're going to have an H1, and I'm going to give that one a class of, this one's different than the rest of them. Normally, again, if you're I talked about BEM earlier on, so if you're using BEM, you do something like home title. In this case, it's more like the page's title. And I feel like I'm going to do page title just like that. And let's just copy this text. So this is what I mentioned about the word wraps. The reason I'm going with page title on this is because I feel like if it is a one-page design, so we could change it, but say this were to become like multiple pages at one point in the future, or something like that, it could be reused on other places. It's not necessarily unique to this home section. So that's what I'm going to go with, and that's my reasoning. If you don't like it, you can of course choose your own. If you can think of a more appropriate title, or if you can think of a more appropriate class, by all means, go for it. That's a nice, easy section. Okay, so now we can go on to this next section. Now, one thing that's interesting with this section is at this screen size, you can see that we have, this is all on the left and my image is here. But if I look at the small screen size, instead, everything is just sort of stacked and the order of it is different. So I'm going to write my markup so it's like this, and then we're going to have to come back after and use, I'm going to use grid to lay this part out, and we're going to use a little bit of grid magic just to get the order and position things actually how we want them to be positioned there. So for here, we're going to do another section class equals, and an ID is equal to about. I just realized something. I did home. I'm going to do section home. So I use the BEM naming convention. So a section, my class name is a section. All of my sections, I want them to have the same like padding top and bottom, for example, for their spacing. There might be a few little other things. And then this is sort of my modifier one. So my home one will get its own background, for example. If I come in and look at this one gets a different background color. This one gets a background image. So I'm going to be using those modifiers, section home, section about, and all of that. So here it's going to be section. So I can get all the universal section styles, and then section about. Let's turn word wrap off. There we go. So if I look in here, I have my H2. So all my section titles will be, whoops, section class. All my section titles will be H2s, and it will be a section title. So a double hyphen like this when you're using BEM is for a modifier. So I'm modifying my regular section with a background color or something like that. And a double underscore is a part of that section. So it's sort of like something that lives inside of that section. So I have my H2. This is a nice big title. And I'm just going to do these as paragraphs. So paragraph class is equal to section subtitle. I have it off screen right there. There we go. So this is a big subhead which mentions something interesting. Cool. After that, I need my image. So image src is equal to images about. Perfect. Alt can be food seen from above. I'm not going to put a class on it right now, but we might have, I think to be able to get this to work properly, I think we're going to have to come back into this and make some changes a little bit to our class names and add some extra stuff just to make it so we can control things properly. But for now, I'm going to keep it simple and we'll come back. H3. This introduces the following text. And then I need a couple of paragraphs. Okay, so that section's done. If you are using VS Code, one thing you might notice is I'm jumping back and forth between having the line breaks on and off. If you want to do that, it's Alt Z on a Windows computer, and I'm guessing on a Mac it would be Option Z would be my guess. So actually, I'm just going to cut to this one being done, and then I'll just take a quick look at it with you once the markup is done on it, just for brevity's sake, because it's a pretty simple section. All right, so here we are back in here. So you can see I've made my section class section facts, just like before, H2, paragraph, and then what I've done is I've put all of these four in a div. For my facts text, the reason I did that is because if we look at this one, they go next to each other. So I want a div around those that's going to be like that, just to hold them in place, even though I'm not going to be using it at the small screen sizes. And then inside my facts text, I have a div for each one. Again, because when I look here, I have a column for each. So this is column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4. Cool. So let's move on to the next one. This one is a little bit more interesting, so I won't cut through it. So let's just scroll down and give myself some space. So we're gonna have a section class equals, you guessed it, section meals. Alrighty. So just like before, we have a h2 class equals section title, sum of our meals. And for the subtitle, they're all the same. So I'm just going to copy the last one I did and paste it in here. Then I have these thingies right here. So I'm going to do it a little bit like I just did above. What I'm going to do is create a div class. I'm just going to call it meals, like that. And then, so what that is that's going to be a div that goes like that. That's going to allow me to have 3 columns. Even though if I look at it here, I don't have 3 columns. They're stacked like that. So I have my meals, and then inside of my meals, each one of these is going to have a figure. So it's an image, and the reason I'm using figure is because it's an image, and then the text is directly linked to that image. It's that this text here is describing the picture. So the text and the image are very related to one another. So a figure, I think, is the appropriate tag to be using. Class equals meals meal. Funny name, but it works. It's the individual meal in my meals. Inside my figure, we need to have an image. I'm just going to do the markup and explain how I'm doing it. I guess this should have a class on it actually. And then so I'm going to write the markup here without putting in like the image and without putting the text, just to explain how I'm organizing it. And then I'll fast forward as I fill in the rest of it, because it'll go a bit faster that way, I think. And the important thing here is my logic behind how I'm writing the markup. So image is class equals to meals image. Nice and simple. After my image, I need a fig caption. So we'll do a fig caption, because this is what's describing it, and class can be meals caption. And inside of there, I need my h3, and I need my paragraph. All right, so then this, let's just space this out so we can see it a little better. Whoops. This is this block here. So I'm just going to fast forward a bit as I fill all of the information in here, and then we'll make sure we have 3 of them. And there we go, that section is done. So I have my section meals, it has the title there, it has the subtitle. Then I have a div class of meals, which is going to let me have 3 columns. And then I'm going to have a figure for each one. The figure has the image, and then a fig caption that has my h3 and my text. And then each one of those is identical. All right, so now we can go down to my client section. So once again, I'm sure you can guess what I'm going to do here. Section class equals section testimonials. All right. As you can probably also guess, we're going to have an h2. My h2 will have a class of section title. And just like before, we can go and copy our subtitle because it's exactly the same, the joy of using lorem ipsum. And now I need to, very similar to this one actually, we have 3 columns, so you can probably assume what I'm going to do right now. We'll have a div class of testimonials. Now I know I'm not like section testimonials. I could do like a double underscore and do that because I'm inside of this section. I'm not 100% of BEM. I take a lot of tips from it, but I don't subscribe 1000% to it. I just find this makes more sense how I'm doing it. So that's why I'm doing this. Testimonials. Inside my testimonials, we'll go back to using some BEM. So I need a few different things. And like before, I'm just going to we need an image. We need a paragraph and, whoops. We need a paragraph and we need to have that little thing on the bottom. So that's a gray box. So that's going to need a div. So we can do a div class of testimonial. Oh, you know what? This is an individual one. So I'm going to do it without the S. Testimonial and then testimonial credit, I guess. It's like the credits for that, the person who was talking. And in there we need to have 2 paragraphs. So we'll do I'll do just 2 paragraphs. Yeah. Paragraph class equals testimonial name. I realize that writing out all these class names like this can be a pain in the butt when you're writing things. Testimonial. You get used to it though. Position, I guess. I think this paragraph's a normal paragraph, so I'm going to leave it like that, but maybe I'd want to give that its own class too. We'll see what happens when we get there. Yeah, we'll go with name and position, and now we'll just, I'm going to give this a class too. Class equals testimonial image, just to be safe. And now just like before, I'll fast forward a bit just as I fill this out now that the structure of it is there. All right, so all 3 testimonials are done. And now we can move on to the footer. Luckily, the footer is super simple. So we're going to do a footer class footer. And in here, we just need to have 3 paragraphs. And they get a little bit of text in them. There's nothing much that goes on in here. I kept it fairly simple. And that's it for the markup of this layout. So if hopefully I've included this file. So if something's not working or you want to reference it, it is there in your files as well in case you need it for any reason whatsoever. Let's move on to doing what you came to this course for and actually writing some Sass. All right, so with the markup done, the very first thing we're going to do is start creating all the variables that we're going to be using. Now one thing, I've opened up my markdown file here in a separate window, but you'll notice it looks a little bit different. If you want to make it look like this, you can just right click on it and you'll see, or here, I'll do it on this side. Just open her up and then you can right click and do open preview, and it's going to open like a rendered version of it, which might make it a little bit easier to read. So if you want to do that, you can. So we want to start doing a little bit of Sass. So I'm going to come here and make a new folder called Sass. And whoops, it should just be in my main folder there. So I have my Sass folder. And inside my Sass folder here, I'm going to make a main.scss, which will be my main place where I import all of my files. Also inside my Sass folder here, I'm going to create a new folder, and this folder will be called abstracts. So the abstracts folder here, again, this is where all the things that don't actually get rendered into CSS go. So this is going to be my colors, my functions, my mixins, and my typography. I'm not actually going to do the mixins and all of that right now. I'm going to sort of create those as we need them. But for the colors and the typography, I think it makes a lot of sense to do now. So we'll start with my colors. So let's, in here in my abstracts folder, I'm going to make a new file, and it's going to be an underscore colors.scss. And In this case, we don't have a lot. I have my primary color, so primary, which is this one right here. So I'll just copy that and paste that in right there. For my neutrals, I'm going to make a map. So I'm going to call this grays, or gray, I guess, gray. And we'll do grays because there's multiple grays. It could be neutrals, it could be anything like that. Just grays is a bit shorter to write, so I'm going to do that. The reason I'm putting this in a map is because I want my different levels of gray, but my primary only has one version. And unless I'm making a map, like if I did this as colors and then I had my primary on its own and then I had a submap for my grays, I wouldn't be able to access it. If you have submaps, you need all of them to have submaps. So I'm just going to use a regular variable for that. But my grays, I'm just going to number them because I find for me that's the easiest thing to do. It makes it a lot shorter to write, and it makes it really easy to use, I find. My lightest one is white because I do have a lot of white in my design. So I am going to put that in there. Now, do you remember when I said with maps, I always put in semicolons, and you're not supposed to put semicolons, you're supposed to put commas. Oops, and I put 2 hashtags there. Bad habit of mine that I do all the time, just because I'm so used to in SAS and CSS in general, putting semicolons everywhere. So there we go, I have my grays. If you want, you could even come here like grays from lightest to darkest, because not everyone will get a little preview. You should be able to look at the numbers and probably figure it out too, but you know, that could be useful. And for my colors, that's it. Those are the only colors that will be used on the site. The other thing I want to do now is we'll make another new one, underscore typography.scss. And one thing to do if you are using the little new folder thing here that I'm doing, just make sure they are going in the right folder, because sometimes you accidentally end up with things in the wrong spot. You can just click and drag to get it where you need it to be. For my typography, I don't really need to do much. I forgot in here to put the font weights. In your file, you'll have font weights in here as well. There's only 3 font weights anyway, but we're going to do font. I do FF serif, or sometimes I'll just do S for serif, SS for sans serif, whatever it is. It depends on the layout. You know, sometimes you have multiple sans serifs, so then I might be a bit more specific on what it's being used for. But in a design like this that only has a serif and a sans serif and there's nothing else, I find this is a nice way to do it. And we're going to have a few font weights. So I'm going to have a font weight normal, and a font weight bold. This will be 300, 400, 900, and I'm just going to copy and paste those in there, and that's it. That's done. That's all we really need for our variables as far as the typography goes. One more here, and we'll do underscore general.scss. And in this one, I'd mentioned we have, if we come down and look, we have our layout and our media queries. So for my layout, I'm going to create a spacer, and my spacer will be 2M, because I mentioned that everything in this design uses that 2M spacing. And I'm going to create a breakpoints map here. So breakpoints, whoops. Okay, so for my breakpoints, I'm only going to have 2, because 0 to 449 doesn't need anything. So I'm going to have a, we'll just say small and big. Small is 450 pixels, and big is 860 pixels. And again, commas, not semicolons. Yes, great. So before we do anything else, let's just go into our main and create import. And I'm going to import my colors, abstracts colors at import abstracts typography and at import abstracts general. I'm going to hit save, and I have my SAS watch here, so I'm going to turn that on. And however you're doing it, I'm going to hit a save on there. And I got an error. Oh, I forgot my S right there. hit save on that. There we go, success, and everything is working, so they're being imported properly. I can come and look. I should have an empty CSS file, but I can see that it did compile that CSS file all on its own. Now, before we can start styling things up, one thing we haven't yet done is add in any functions. And when we start doing our typography, one of the things we're gonna have to do is change the color of things. So let's create our function to get our colors. So you could technically put that in the colors because it's all related, but I like having a different file for all my functions, because this project will probably only have this one function. But if you have a project that has 6, 7, 8 functions, you don't want to remember, well, where exactly, is that function in this file or that file? All your functions are just in one spot. So personally, I like doing that. If you think it makes more sense to have a color function saved with the color and a typography one saved with typography, that's fine too. So I'm going to do @function, and we'll call it gray because it's when I want to use my gray colors. I'm going to give it, so if we go and look at my colors map, it's grays, and then I just have my numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 like that. I think my default one that I want is going to be the 4, because that's sort of like a nice, or should it be the 5? I'm going to do a default on the 4. So we're going to call that a shade of 4. So just it's defaulting to that, and then we're going to do value, and we'll do our map get. On my map get here, let's see, I'm going to be looking into my grays map, and I want it to grab the shade. And then we need it to @return that value that we just got. So I should hit save on that. So that's great. Let's come over to my main.scss now, and we want to add that in. So @import abstracts functions. Hit save on that, and we can test that our function is working by trying it out. So let's go and do that. Body color is gray. We'll try number 2 just to have something different. Hit save, and we should be able to go look at my Sass, and there we go. I can see that it's working. Now, normally I would never actually put anything in here. I would always have this blank, and this is just a giant file of imports. But in this, whenever you want to test something, the easiest thing to do is just throw it in right there. Or even sometimes before all your imports, so it's right at the top of your CSS file if you have some Sass that is being compiled. Okay, so we can also have this throw an error if somebody either doesn't put a number or they put a number that's too big or too small. So we can say if, let's do type, whoops, not like that, type of, so we want to check that, see if shade, so type of shade is not equal to a number. So if it's not equal to a number, or if shade is less than 1, or if shade is greater than 5. All of these cases, we will have it throw an error. Error, gray, only accepts numbers between 1 and 5. So we can test this out to see if it's working. We'll do body, background is gray 2, and hit save, and that's successfully compiled, and we can come and look, and we can see that it worked. And then we can come back, and let's change this to 2, and hit save on that, and now we got an error. Gray only accepts numbers between 1 and 5. Super. So it's working, and we can even try with this with 0 and see what happens. We still get the same error, and we can put 10. And 10 also gives us an error, and let's switch that back to a 5, and it's successfully compiled. So we know that it's working. I can delete all this now, hit save, and my function is good to go. All right, so this is what our site currently looks like, and now it's time to start styling it up. Now what I find a lot of people do is they'll start styling things before they do the typography, and they sort of style the text as they need to. I find it a lot easier to do as much of the text as possible right from the beginning and then start worrying about the layout, because the text influences the layout so much. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come here and we're going to make a base folder. and I don't want that in my abstracts. I want it to be there. And in this base folder, I'm going to do an underscore typography. For a word I write a lot, I misspell it all the time. Typography. And I can start working. So let's not forget to import that. So at import base / typography. Save, semicolon. So in here, the very first thing I'm going to put is my import for my Google Fonts. And this is the first compiled CSS anywhere. So I know that this is getting brought in before everything else. So this is going to be right at the top of my actual CSS file. So I'm bringing in my Google Fonts, and then I'm always going to start with my body and sort of work my way down. So my font family on my body here is FF Sans. So that's my sans serif font. I like having the FF there. It just makes it really easy to know. So I've hit save, and I can see right away that it changed my font, so I know things are working properly. Now, if you're looking at that markdown file I gave you, the font size will be 1 rem. The line height can be 1.6. The color of it, we get to use our gray because it's one of the grays. Now let's go look at the design of it, because you can see that it's a little bit of a lighter gray than this. So this is my darkest color. This is like the next step away. So the darkest is 5, so we'll go with 4. And yeah, that looks pretty good. My font weight too, I'm going to go with a font weight of 300 of light. On this one, because I think it's going to look a little bit nicer for the body text. And one thing I don't usually do, but in this case I'm going to do a text align center, because on both the big design and the little design, pretty much everything is center aligned. There's a few things along the way that aren't. I made a mistake here. It should be font weight light. There we go. And everything is working nicely. One thing I also tend to do is reset a lot of the margins and spacing on my type. And while I'm here, I'm also going to do my figure and my fig caption, because one of those always has some margin on it. So I'm going to do margin 0, padding 0, and we'll come through and set those up again with their own margins a little bit, but I find those get in the way more often than not. Cool. Okay, let's just keep looking here. Now, I know I have my paragraph styles set on everything, but in this case, all my H1s, my 1H1 and my H2, both have the font family of font family serif. So I'm just going to put that here. And I never gave any of my H3s a style per se, so I'm just going to style those here. So one thing, again, if we look back at the design, we can see that the text on this is always darker than this. So I'm going to right away, I'm going to give this one a color of gray. That's the number 5. Good. Also, if we look at the design, and let's just move this up so we can see what we're doing. We can look at both of these at the same time. These are always all cap, so I just want to make sure that this one is, but this one isn't. So I can do a text transform uppercase just to make sure they always are. Line height 1.2, 1.3125. And I'm going to hit save on that. And it's starting to come together. Now for spacing issues, not so much with this one. We do have a bit of space there, more space than we have here. And if we look at my other ones, after, like, I always have my paragraph, and then I always end up with a big space. So I'm going to put a margin top of about 2em on it and hit save. And I do want a little bit of space underneath it. I don't want these to be so glued together. So we'll come and give that a margin bottom of, I don't know, 0.5em or something. So it's about half the font size. So it's a lot smaller than the margin that is here on the top. Good. Now let's come to here. I have my page title. So this is I think all my general styles are done. So I'm going to come and take a look at this this bad boy right here, and we're going to sort of start doing it a little bit more like that. So let's come and take a look at my page title. Page title. Color would be gray 1 because it should be white. I'm not going to hit save. Actually, let's just comment that out for a second because I want to make sure I can see. My font size is 3 rem. My line height is 1.2. Let's just save that and see what it, there we go. So it is working, and then this should make it white, so it should just disappear. But it's obviously still there. Good. Next is all of my section stuff. So now we actually get to use a little bit of Sass because I'm going to nest this. I'm going to do section, and then I'm going to say and title. So my section title, the color on this one is primary. And the font size on this one would be 3 rem. Let's just hit save and take a look. The reason I said primary is because it's always all my titles, except I think one of them use the orange color. And my line height should be 1. Line height should be 1. Good, good, good. I do need, if you look at the markdown file, the font sizes do change at different screen sizes. So we're going to come back in and do that once we start working on the larger screen sizes. And I've built out my media query mixin. For my subtitle, we can do a color. The color on my subtitles is quite a bit lighter, so we're going to do a gray of 3. That I think looks good. We need to make that bigger. Font size 1.68 rem. I didn't put this in the file, but I do think that the font weight is going to have to change. Font weight normal, because it looks a little bit too light. That looks better. The line height is 1.1. And I'm going to give it a little margin top. Let's try 0.5 em, just because right now it's way too stuck to my actual title. There we go. That looks a little bit nicer. I'm not worried that my titles are stuck in these cases, because this is right at the top of my section, and my section is going to get some padding on it once we start laying that out. So I think that's it for my typography. That sets us up now to be able to start actually working on the layout a little bit. So let's start doing that in the next video. All right, so we're ready to keep going on the rest of our layout. So I'm going to we're doing layout stuff now. So I'm going to make a new folder called layout. And I did it again. Let's make sure it's in my Sass folder. And that layout is in there. I'm going to start with my general.scss. And I'm going to make sure I import it at import layout/general. So the reason I have this general is just to do the general stylings on things that, well, layout-wise, I want to be everywhere. So it's general layout stuff. So one thing that I always do is something after. Something like this, and then my box size and border box, just because that's really nice and handy and makes life a lot easier. And if you're not too familiar with that, it just makes it so the padding is not added to the total size of something, the borders and padding. The padding is instead included in the total width, so it just makes it easier to size things. Another thing that we generally want to do is margin of 0 on my body here. I mentioned this when I was looking at this in the previous section when I was just looking at partials. If this is the only thing I'm doing on my body, and I have my typography thing here that has body styles on it, so if you put your margin of 0 here, it's really not the end of the world. But I'm keeping all my layout stuff in the layout area. I'm also going to do my images, so a max width of 100% and a height of auto to make them nice and responsive by default. And the last thing I think we need in here, will be our dot section. So all of my sections are going to have a padding on them. Now I don't know how big I need this padding to be. Let's just go take a look. That's the sort of spacing that I'm after. I'm going to do one thing here. Let's just do a section about background gray. I just want to be able to... Oh, I got an error. I'll just do 0 for now. Save. I just want to be able to see the space here between my two sections while I do this padding. I'm going to put a little bit of padding on the left and the right because I'm worried about the mobile sizes right now. And on the top and bottom, I'm going to go with 6M to start with and 1M. Actually, let's just do our spacer for the left and the right. So the left and right looks decent. Actually, it looks pretty good overall. I'm going to leave it just like that, and we can delete this right there. It's just important that you put a background color because right now this space looks absolutely massive, but we just have to remember there's always a color that goes in between. Every section has a color break, so the space there is half of what we see. I'm going to make this a little smaller, actually. I'm going to go with 4. Because on mobile screens, that space still could be kind of big. Cool. Good. So that is the general styles all done. Next, we can actually start doing the navigation and then into the rest of our document. All right, so we're ready to do our navigation. So I'm going to actually put my navigation in my layout one because I think it makes sense for this document. I'm not going to put it in the components. Which I sometimes do. So let's make nav.scss. And go into my main here and import layout/nav. Awesome. So now I can start doing that. Let's close that. I don't need that. So I want to start doing my navigation. For this, I'm going to split this off to the side just in case I need to reference it for something. I'm going to turn off the word wrap on it, and I'm going to give myself a bit more room. I just want to be able to check it. I think we'll be okay, and I won't have to look at it, but just in case. So everything's inside my nav. And one thing I need on my nav is a position absolute. I'm going to not put this, I'm going to write it in absolute. I'm not going to do it right away because if I do that, then everything else sort of comes underneath and it makes it hard to see what's happening. So I'm going to have that there, but for the moment, I'm not going to actually use it until we're done styling it up. I'm going to use my left. It has a position absolute, so I'm going to do left of 0, right of 0. And I'm going to do a top on that of my spacer because I don't want it to be stuck to the very, very top. Again, that shouldn't really change anything for the time being though. Now inside my nav, I have my UL. And this is where you could have like nav __ list and then list item and all of that. For my navigations, I tend just to nest it like this. I'm only nesting one deep. So the outputted CSS, we'll take a look at it in a second, but it doesn't bother me. The typical things on here, margin of 0, padding of 0, and a list style of none. And we should probably look at what this actually looks like. Oh, and we have to change the font family. Font family serif. We'll hit save. That is looking good. The color obviously has to be white, but I'm going to wait until, again, we have it set up. For this, I'm going to use a display of flex on here. And actually, one thing I'm also going to do, I want to get my logo a bit smaller, or we're never going to be able to figure this out. And actually, it's small screens. It's just turned off, so display of none and vanish. There we go. I'm just going to do an inspect on here for 1 second. Inspect element. If you're in Chrome, the little buttons here. In Firefox, I can go to here and it turns on the responsive mode. One nice thing about responsive mode with Firefox is I can close the developer tools, but I still have what it looks like here, which is really handy. Awesome. Oh yeah, my white text. I was wondering what all that space was about. Okay, so I can see more of what it's going to look like at a small screen size now. Display of flex, that's good. I'm going to do a justify content center. No, I need space. Space evenly. Now, if you're using space evenly, it works, but it's one of the newer properties. It just means there's equal spacing around stuff. a little bit. I like it better than the other two, but the browser support for it isn't amazing. I'm not worrying about browser support at the moment. I'm just trying to style it to look good because our focus is on SAS, so it's not backwards compatible or stuff like that. But you might want to go with space around or space between if you're worried about browser support. Good. I'm going to put this on just because it's not going to be stuck to the top like that. It's going to move down. All right, we can leave it on like that now. My text is there. Okay, so that's all fine and dandy. There's the color issue. So let's come in here and do my color of, yeah, we'll do it here. Gray 1 and a text decoration of none because it's styled up and it's looking good. That's just going to make it disappear because it's there but with white text. So I believe for the small screens, that is the navigation all wrapped up and finished. Next, we're going to style up this part here. So we'll give it the background and some padding, and that will make sure that we can actually see our navigation as well. All right, so next up, we're going to be coming into here. So in my layout folder right there, I'm going to make a new folder called _home.scss, since that's what I called it in my design. I'm going to come to my main and I'm going to import my home. Let's copy and paste that to go a little bit faster. And in my home, what do we need to do? We need to have, so it's section home. We'll have a background URL. Now this is one thing, if you're used to the autocomplete stuff in here, where if I go back a step, it's looking at my abstracts and my base and my layout. The only thing is I'm in my SAS folder, I'm in my layout folder, so that's backtracking into my SAS folder. I can't think of this as a relative URL from this file anymore. I have to think of it as a relative one from this file, which isn't what I'm in now. So my back a step, and then it's going to go into my images, and then from my images, it's going to get home bg.jpg, I believe is the name of it. Oh, I called it hero. I thought it was home. Hero bg.jpg. And there we go. My image comes in. We're just going to want to set a background size on this of cover. I want to see what this looks like now. So let's just make this a bit bigger. And just if we have a taller screen. So I'm going to want to give it, let's give it like padding. I want to give it more padding. I'm just going to give it like 10 spacer. And I'm actually going to give it a min height. Because if I'm on a small screen, if I'm on a small screen, that's fine that it does something like that. And I have to scroll down to keep going. But if I'm on a really big screen, I sort of want this to take up more space. So we're going to give this a min height, I don't know, 80 viewport height. And now it can be smaller, so it's going to shrink and grow a little bit that way, but it does have a minimum of the, it does have like this padding is sort of creating a minimum total for it. And otherwise it will grow more from there. So it always has to have a height of 80 viewport height. So it's the minimum, but if it happens to have a bigger height than that, it doesn't matter. So it's a nice way to make it responsive really early on. Now the only problem when this gets bigger is my text isn't centered. Display, flex, justify content center, align items center. There we go, and it's dead bang right in the middle, no matter what happens. So if that's big, it's still in the middle, and if that shrinks and then stops, we're just always right in the middle of that. So it's always looking good. It's nice and responsive, and we're rocking. So that's it for the home section. Now we can move on to the about section. All right, so here we go for the about section. So let's go into our SAS folder, go into my layout here, and come and make a new file called _about.scss. I think by now you get the idea of where this is going. So we'll copy that, we'll paste that in, and we'll call this about, and hit save, and come into this file. So for this file, this image needs a little shadow on it, which I don't have right now. But by default, there's not too much missing in this section. The real complicated part of this section comes once we get to the large screen sizes and we start worrying about our media queries a little bit. But if we come and look at the default, the only thing is this underline, which I completely forgot about. And that isn't styled properly. So I have to go look. I must have made a mistake in my markup when I made that. And we need it to have an underline on it, which I completely forgot about when I was doing my type. And we're going to add our shadow. Now there's a few things that have shadows, so we're going to make a variable for our shadow as well. So let's just go and look at my index over here and see what I did wrong. Section, I missed an underscore. Good. Now I need that to have an underline. I have an underline here, but I also have underlines here. So when we do that, we have to use a pseudo element. So what we're going to do for now, I'm going to give this the shadow on it, and then we're going to come back in the next part and we'll work on creating a little mix-in to create that line so we can use it throughout our site anywhere we need an underline like that. So for the little shadow on here, it's a really subtle shadow. I know I didn't give anything to, we're going to go into my abstracts and go to general here, and we'll create a box shadow. It's going to be a really subtle. So 0, 0, I don't want any offset on it. The blur on it, I'm thinking of something like 10 pixels or something. So like 0.5 would be an 8 pixel blur. So we'll start with that 0.5 and then I want an RGBA because I want to make it transparent. I'm going to use my gray here. So my gray, we'll start with a 3 and see how that looks. And then we'll start with a 0.5 because that's usually where I start, and we'll see how that looks. And I got an error, and this is a really interesting error, and this goes back to file organization. So if we look here, it's saying that there was a compilation error. Argument color of our must be a color, and it's saying that so it's even pointing it out to me, it's saying that this isn't a color. I went, oh, wait, why is it not a color? In my functions, I have that, but let's go and look at my main. I'm bringing my functions in after my colors, so I don't have access to my gray at the moment. So what I need to do is take this functions and bring it over to the top and hit save, and then my issue is solved, and now I have access to that. So as I mentioned, you might run into issues like this. It happens from time to time, and you're not really sure why. You go, I'm sure I've set it all up properly. Pay a lot of attention to the order that you're importing your files in. So it's a nice little lesson there. And now we can go back to our about, and we haven't done anything in here yet. So this was my section about. I don't know if we need to do anything on that exactly, but I just want to double check here. Section about. I didn't give this image a class, so I'm going to give this a class. Class is equal to section about image, just so I can select this image on its own. So let's go back to here, and then I can do my and image. Should have the box shadow of box shadow. And we don't have a box shadow. I forgot to save this file too. It has the name on it. There we go. There's shadows there. It's really, really subtle. But if you go and look at the design itself, it's supposed to be really, really subtle. So I think, ignore that like darker line there, but you can see it's maybe all. Let's go back to my function, not my functions. General, make it a little bit darker. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to stick with that. Now I know the spacing here is still off, but we're going to fix that in the next video when we add in our mix-in. All right, so we want to fix the spacing issue here and add our line. So to do that, I'm going to come into my abstracts and I'm going to create a new file, mixins.scss, and I'm going to come over to my main and import that. I'm going to do it before my general, just in case I end up using a mix-in I don't think I'd end up doing that, but anyway, I think mix-ins with an S. Okay, so we are good to rock and roll now. So in my mix-ins here, what I want to do is make a pseudo element underline type thing. So I'm going to do @mixin underline, And again, it's because we're using this in a few different places. Now for this, I'm just trying to think if I was styling this, well, the first thing we'd want is it's always going to have the double after like that, right? So we're doing a pseudo element, so it's always going to have this, and then we need content of nothing each time. We need it, I'm going to have it be a display block. Margin will be, we'll go with spacer, I guess, spacer auto. So it's the spacer will be the space on the top and the bottom, and then the auto left and right will just center it. Background, I want to be able to change that because this one here is a different color than this one here. So the color is going to come up as background. I'm going to make an argument that we can put in for that. And the height of it, I think I'm going to give that something like that to an argument. And then content, we can add extra stuff to that if we need to. I'm just trying to think if that is everything we need. Oh, of course it needs a width. Width of width. And I'm going to give that an argument too. Okay, so all of those need arguments. So my background, I'm going to go with a fun little one here, current color. The reason I'm using current color means that's going to take the color of the text. Whatever the text color is, the current color of the text, it's going to use that as its background color. It's a fun little property that people don't always know about. The default, what's next? My spacer is just my general spacer. Actually, this one's a lot smaller than the other one. This will be margin. So that will be our, let's add that in here. Margin, my default margin will be my spacer though. The default height will be, say, 2 pixels. And the default, let's turn off, let's put word wrap on so we can see this a little better. The default height, we just did height width, will be, I don't know, 25%. Just 25% makes sense, right? We'll try that and we'll see how it works. We can always modify it afterwards. So I think that's going to work. So I'm going to save that. And let's go and try it out. So I'm going to go back. So to try it out, I haven't got to this part yet, but we have got this here. So let's go to my typography because all my subheads have this. So we're going to go to my subtitle. And we're going to do an include underline. I think I gave everything a default argument, so let's just see what happens if I do that. It worked. Cool, good. It's not quite big enough. But what happened? I'm just thinking it's going to grow and grow and grow. And I might have a bit of an issue that it's going to grow too big. It's not terrible, actually. I was worried it would get too big, but it's not too bad. And then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Cool. It works for me. Except I'm just going to change, let's go back to here. I'm going to change the height to 1 pixel. I find it a little bit thick. I want it to be pretty subtle. Yeah, it looks a little nicer. Typography. Did I give this a margin top? I'm going to make it a bit bigger. I want a bit more space there. Okay, much better. Good. I like that. And then we have that. So then we have another one there. Perfect. And then we should have that one. Awesome. So that works really well. We have some spacing issues here, but that's okay. Whoops. I do. That's a mistake. We'll fix that after when we get to there. Okay, good. Let's keep on going. So that is, this section is all done. Again, we're going to come back after and fix these up for larger screens, but now we can move on to our some interesting things, which just pretty much needs a background color on it. So that one's not going to be too difficult. So now we can move on to our facts. So I'm going to go into layout, and this one does not have too much going on for it. So it's going to be nice and fast, facts.scss. I'm going to come over to here, copy that, paste you, facts. Sweet. And I think all we need for this one, so section facts, I think all we need is our background of gray 2. It's not quite white, but it's as close to white as we can get. It looks a little bit darker than this one, but that's what. I'm also in Firefox here. You can even see the orange is a different color. If you're in Chrome, the colors will probably be a little bit more accurate. So since that section was so fast, let's also move on to the next one, because if not, it's a bit of a waste of a video. So let's go on to our meals. So we can close that one down, and I can come into my layout here and make a new file, _meals.scss. And I can come back to here and I can import that one, because this one is going to need quite a bit of work. So let's go and take a look at it. All right, so first things first, section meals. And on this, I obviously need a different background color. So URL on this one, backwards into images into meals bg.jpg. I say with lots of confidence. Yeah, good, I got it. Now one thing is here, the color. So there's a few different options. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into my index. Now there's, I want to add a class to here, and there's two different ways you can do it. You can either just take a section title and give it like a modifier, which would be sort of the more normal way to do it, section title meals, and then that's your modifier for that. So you're changing it to be white. Is that the only one that I have that's white, or do I have another one? Because if not, if I had, maybe we could just do a white. I think I'm going to go with this actually. I was going to do a section meals title, but I think section title meals, but I could just do section title white like that. I think it makes a little bit more sense, and it's more reusable. So if I had another section that had a white title on it or something like that, I could come in and easily modify it. So we'll go into my typography here and section title, and then in here I can say, and white would be color gray 1. And there we go, that has changed over. So I'm just modifying that. Cool. Now I also need to change the color of these ones down here. Anyway, that's a general thing. So we're going to get to that in a second. Good. So that looks good. Let's we can get out of my typography now and come back to my meals. And let's scroll down a little bit. I need to style these up, and obviously the color of these is going to change as well. What if I just actually on here just did color of gray 1? That's working for everything except for those, obviously. But I think, let's just go back to my index for a second. Didn't I give those? I didn't give those a title. I think what I might do is call those, I'm just going to do left or control or command click in all of those and do a class is equal to meals caption, or just meals title, to be able to put the white on that, because without that, yeah, because that's the title for each meal. So I think that does make sense. So we're good there, and then we can come in and say my meals, because we have quite a bit of stuff we need to do for it. First of all, this font, the white font here, can be a little bit hard to read on a black or dark background. Plus, it's actually going to be on top of my image, so it might even be harder. So I'm going to do a font weight, font weight of font weight normal on this section, just to, there we go. It's going to make it a little bit easier to read in general. And now I want to do some stuff in here. So I have my figure is going to be position relative, because I want to take this meals part and stick it on top. So the position relative on here, we're just going to leave it like that for now, I think, and we're going to work on our caption, which is the position absolute. So position absolute is good. Let's give them a background of RGBA gray. I want it the darkest one, and then we'll do it at like 0.5 or something like that. I usually start with 0.5. I find it's the easiest thing to start with. We also need to say that the left 0, right 0. Why is that so wide? Oh, my image. Something weird going on here. Let's do an inspect element on here. And, oh, I shouldn't have put figure here. I should have put this as meal. Okay, yeah, that's okay. We'll get those back in a second. Bottom of 0. There we go. Okay, so we have it placed somewhere now. On this, I want to add a margin bottom of spacer because they're way too close together. Meal and image. And on here, I want to do a display of block because an image is an inline block by default, which allows for descenders. So you always get that like a little annoying space. There's other solutions to this too. You can do like a line height of 0, I think, and there's a few other things, but in this case, it doesn't need to align it with anything, so that this works perfectly fine. I can change this gray back now to the dark color. Good. Now, I was going to put the styles for the title here, but I think I'm just going to... Yeah, I'm still going to do it. So, caption and title would be color gray 1, so it's the white color, and then margin of 0, margin top of 0 anyway, margin top of 0 to get rid of all that extra spacing. And then on the caption itself, I can add some padding of spacer. That looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. And I think that is it for this one. Awesome. Alright, we're almost done with the mobile version of this. We're going to finish the whole thing up in this video. We just have this part here to do, and then the footer, which is really simple. So we'll do them both in this one video. So let's close this down. We'll come into our layout here. We'll make a new file called testimonial.scss, and we will import that into here. Copy, paste, and testimonial. Save. Super. I noticed before that I'd made that mistake, so let's go and fix that because it should just be what our clients are saying about us. I copied and pasted when I shouldn't have. Or I didn't put one, and I put a subtitle when there is no subtitle. That's what happened. What our clients are saying about us. That is much better. Awesome. So you'll notice right now these are a little bit too close together. Luckily, that doesn't mean I have to add a margin on my title, because if I did that, it would just cause problems. I could add a class to this whole thing, but I have a... Oh man. I just realized another mistake I did. I didn't... I think when I was coding it, I mentioned that I was going to do a box around all of them, and then I never did it. So let's go and do that now. This one will just be div class equals testimonials. Yeah, we'll do it like that so it's a little bit similar, and we'll close it right there. Save. Because what we can do is on that testimonials, we can just add a margin top to it. So dot testimonials margin top of 3M. There we go. Could I just do the spacer instead of 3M? I don't know why I did 3M. We'll just go with the spacer. It's a little bit smaller than that, but that's okay. Good. Now what we want is for each individual testimonial. So those are just dot testimonial. So for each one of these, I did a box shadow on it, and this is the same as the shadow we already have. Whoops, I put shadow, this should be box shadow. There we go, so we can see it starting to come in, and it looks pretty good. They obviously need a little bit of space around them. Right now they're glued in, so we can just do a margin bottom of spacer and give us our nice space between. Good. Now if we look at here, this text is sort of isolated. So if I look there, I just have a paragraph, so I'm going to change this. I have to change all three of them. We'll do class equals testimonial body, I guess. It's the body text. So we can come inside of our testimonial and do body. Now these testimonials, if this was a bigger site where you might be making things that look like this for different purposes, there might be testimonials and there might be other cards that keep this type of look, we could easily actually build this out in a components section instead of in testimonial. We could call it like card. And then reuse this card. It has a header image, it has the main body, and it has a footer to it. So that would definitely be an option as well when coding this up. I wasn't really thinking of that when I started, so I'm going to leave it like this. But it's definitely something that you could do, and then it would help the reusability of it in a way instead of only being built for the testimonials. So the body here, we'll just give it some padding of spacer. Doesn't that look better? Now my text is more bold here, but I think I like this better, so I'm going to leave it like that. If you prefer, you can always change it to the heavier font size. Then we have my and. I think I called that area the credit, right? So that should have a background of gray 2, because it's not white, it's the light gray. Perfect. It needs a padding of spacer, and look at all these nice little Sass things we're using to build this out. Lots of variables. We have our little function we built there. So nice. I think that's it. And do and name, because the font weight should be more on this one. Font weight should be font weight bold. There's also this thin little line in between, so we get to use our mix-in on this one as well. So include underline. Now I'm going to just do it like this, but I think we're going to have to make some changes to it. You can see that the spacing is too big. So I can come in and change my margin here. We'll change it to like 0.5 em. And the color of it I don't really like, but instead of changing the background color on it, I'm going to change the opacity just to like, oh, whoop, not here. We can do that because I made it so we can add our own content in here. So for our own content, opacity of 0.5 maybe. A lot less, 2.5. There we go, it's starting to disappear. It's a little bit bigger than this one, so I could change the width too. Should we? Okay, we'll change the width too. So we can just come in here and write width. It was 25% before. Should I just put in a fixed value? Say like 100 pixels. Oh, it's even bigger than it was. 50 pixels. We can just lock it in like that. That's definitely an option. Does it look okay? Yeah, it looks okay even with a longer name for sure. The other thing is this text here is a lighter color, I think, and it's smaller than the normal text. So that one I had given it its own name. That was and position, I believe. So I can do a font size on that, and I haven't built in a font size for this, so we'll just do like a 0.9 em, make it a little bit smaller. Color can be gray 3. There we go, just to fade it out tad. Really good. I'm happy with that. So this was a fun one to build, and I think this one really sort of shows a lot of the good stuff of Sass when you're using it. We have a lot of nesting going on here just to make our lives a little bit easier for naming things, and we're just using our functions. We're using a mix-in. We're using lots of variables, so this was a fun one to do. And I think it looks pretty nice. Now we just have our footer left to do. So while we're still, we'll come back into our layout, make a new folder, file called footer.scss. We'll go into our main, we'll import our footer, and we'll save that. And our footer should be fairly simple. The footer, so we just have .footer for the class name, background, gray 4. Yeah, I think we'll go with that one. What did I have in my design? I think that's going to be too dark if I do that one. Yeah, it's too dark. We'll go with 4. Gray 4, which is the same as the text color, obviously. Now this isn't white, my text there. So my color will be gray 2. We need some padding on here of spacer. And that's pretty much it. I just realized one thing, though, that might be a bit of an issue. Maybe. I never gave my paragraphs a space between them. And I just noticed that here because my paragraphs are stuck together, which they should be spaced out, and that should be happening automatically. And I don't know why I didn't realize it before. And that's because when we did my typography, I set everything to have a margin of 0, and I never changed the one on the paragraph. So I'm just going to come in here quick, paragraph, margin, bottom of like 0.8 em. I liked having it less than the actual font size. Let's just make sure that didn't break anything overall, though. This is all good. That's all good. The spacing here is too much now, so we just have to fix that up a little bit. Pretty much the only thing that seems to be broken is this, so luckily we're still right there. We were just working on that. Testimonial, so the name and the position both just need a margin. We can just do margin 0. There we go, just to get rid of all that extra spacing. And I'm just going to move this up to before my mix-in, just so it looks a little bit more clean. No necessary thing to do there, I just find it looks better when I'm reading it myself. Cool, I'm happy with that. So yeah, I'm happy with that. We're done, and now we can start working on the larger screen sizes. Alright, so we're going to be working on our larger screen sizes now, and one thing we're going to need is media queries, and if we're using media queries, I say we make a mix-in for our media queries. We've already spent a lot of time building one out, so if you want to go and take the one that we've already created, you can definitely do that. I'm just going to do this one quickly, and it'll be a bit of a nice refresher on how to make one. I'm not going to build the errors and everything into this, but if you'd like to, you're more than welcome to. So this one's going to take a size. Then what we're going to do is we're going to get our value, which the size we're going to be putting there is going to be from our breakpoints map that we made. So just as a little bit of a refresher, if I go into my general here, I just made this really small breakpoints, one with a small and a big. So my value is going to be the map get of break points size, and then we're going to do a at media min screen only screen and min width of value, and then in here we can do our content. Awesome. So with that done, we can come in and start looking at what this is going to look like at larger screen sizes. Now the biggest issue at sort of the medium, and we can bring this up to be a bit bigger now. The biggest issue we're going to run into as this becomes larger is not so much that I mind it all being one column. I want to wait till we're at the larger of the breakpoints, the 860, before we start getting into columns. But before we get into the columns, when we're at like certain sizes like this does not look very nice. I'd like it if this could stay small. I don't mind that the titles are stretching across, but this makes for really long line lengths, and long lines like that are just awkward to read. So the first set of stuff we're going to be doing is just taking, well, and this is obviously an issue because it's getting bigger than our pictures and it just looks awful. We'll probably have the same thing here. Yeah, our picture is not as big as what we're dealing with because we never want this to get this big. It just starts looking really awkward. So the first thing we're going to do is run through and do it for this sort of medium screen size that we don't have a design for. We can also have our logo come back in. And then after that, we'll have another one where we'll come in and build it out for the large screen size. So the first thing we'll do is we'll fix our logo here. So let's go and find our nav. And here where we have our logo at none, we don't want that to happen. Now we're gonna have to do a little bit of work here, but that's okay. Include MQ small. And let's do a display inline block so we can see it. Now that doesn't look too good now, does it? Now this is an SVG, and if you haven't worked too much with SVGs, luckily it's easy to change. Now it's not background color, it's not color, we use fill. And fill will be the color inside of it. So for this I can use my, not color, gray 1. And that will take that color and make it the fill color, so it's going to fill it in with that color. Now it's obviously way too big too, so let's give it a fixed size of 150 pixels. It's a little bit too big, 120 maybe. So I like how that's looking. The only problem is these are at the top and then that's like that, which doesn't look very nice. So I'm just going to come up to here where I have my display flex, and we'll just come here and add an align items center. There we go. That looks much, much better like that. So now we have our nice little effects there. Awesome. So now we have all of that set up and it's looking pretty good. So now, as I mentioned, what we want to do is we want to limit the overall size of these. So I'm going to go, because of how I laid out the home, actually, it's going to be a little bit harder. And I don't mind this as much as this. I find this looks really terrible. Whereas this one, it's not ideal, but we'll live with it. For these ones here, though, on our fax area, I think we can do something with that. So let's go and look at my index. And this is one of the issues, because I'm using display grid as much as possible. Sometimes things like this become a little bit harder to handle, but that's okay. I could do a display grid and sort of set everything up there, but I don't think we need to. Let's go and look here. And the advantage of what I'm doing right now too is if the person's not using a browser that supports grid, this is sort of the fallback because we haven't used grid anywhere yet. We're only going to use grid on the larger screen size, and that's going to make this version of it the fallback, and it's going to make it at least still very functionable. Even at really large screen sizes, it just won't look as good. So my section fax, here we have this fax text div, and I'm going to use that fax text div to do something. Let's go and find it, fax. Section fax. And then I have my fax text. So for my fax text, I want to do an @include MQ small. And we're just going to give it a max width. Nice and simple. That's, I think, the size. It's a little bit smaller than what we have. And a margin of 0 auto to keep it centered. Of course, this you need to do it properly, double underscore. And there we go. So what's pretty much going to happen is it will expand out. Then that will limit the maximum size that it can get to. So this can keep getting wider. That's really not a big deal. You know, if this gets really big, that still looks fine. And then we get this coming down underneath it. Now, normally at this point, we'd have gone into our 4 columns. But again, if somebody's on a website that doesn't support grid, it's not ideal, but at least the website is still functional. All right, so that one's pretty much done. That's a lot of exactly what I want to be doing for all of these sections, actually. It's always going to be the same. I think. Would we be able to do the same thing on our meals? We're going to be able to do this exact same thing again here to limit this, and we're going to be able to do the exact same thing again here, which to me means it's time to make another mix-in. Now, I wasn't planning on doing this, but at mix-in, limit width, let's call it, because we're limiting the overall width. We need our parentheses on here. This is going to be a mix-in where we don't really need to do anything. Let's go back to here and just take this whole thing out and drop it in our mix-in here and hit save. So now let's just go back up so we can see where we were and make it bigger. Oh, I didn't save this. So that's empty, it's not doing anything. And then I should just be able to do at include limit width. And voila, it's limiting the width of that area. So that's going to make our life a little bit easier. So now we can come into meals, and I believe it would be right here, at include limit width. Super duper, and that worked like a charm. And then one more time in our testimonials. That would be here where all my testimonials are, at include limit width. And voila, we're done. That's it for the medium size breakpoint. So it's nothing fancy, it's nothing too much, but I think it does a good job of making sure that we don't sort of run into any issues as we're transitioning to the larger screen size. And then in the next video now, we'll take a look at how we can handle doing the nice layout using some grid. Okay, so it's time to start working on our large screen sizes now. So the first time that's really going to come into play is this one where we haven't actually done very much. And when I say this one, I mean this part here where we just have this really generic layout right now, but we want to make it something a lot more interesting where the image is on the left, our text is on the right. So we do have to make quite a bit of changes to this. So let's just pull up the design and see what it is that we're actually after. So we can see it right here. We want it to have the image there, and the image is going to be moved up, and then we need all of our text on the left side here. And I didn't put the underline. I think we're going to leave the underline anyway. Okay, so let's take a look at how we're going to do that. So the first thing we're going to do is move, we're still inside of our section about, and we want to come in here and do an at MQ. Sorry, not at MQ, at include MQ. And now we can get started. So in here, I want this to now be a display grid. And you know what? I'm going to write this out the first time, but we'll probably make a mix in here too. Grid template columns. Because grid template columns is really long to write. We might be able to make a little mix in that sort of automates some of this stuff for us. The grid template columns, we're going to have 2 columns. So let's just do a repeat 2, 1 FR, so they're equal. Whoops, 1 FR. So if you're not used to grid, I'm not going to be doing a full thing on it right now, but what this is pretty much doing is making 2 columns. So repeat 2, so we're making 2 columns, and 1 FR just means they're equal size, let's say. For simplicity's sake, that's what it's doing. And let's hit save, and it's going to break everything. But at least we can see we have 2 equal columns. And we also need a text align left. Whoops, text align left. Super. Now the big issue is placing everything we want on the grid. We also need a grid gap on here. Grid gap of spacer. That's going to cause one little issue though. It's going to put spaces this way too. You can see it makes spaces up and down, which is going to get too big. So there's going to be a grid column gap only. We only want it between our columns. We don't want any gaps between our rows of content. Okay, so that's it for setting up our grid. Okay, so now I need to be able to place all of these things where I want them to. And I think for this, we're gonna have to go back to my index page and take a look at the markup, because I need to be able to control where all of these things are going. So I'm gonna do a section about title, a section about subtitle. Here I already did it for my about section about image. So this is going to get class is equal to section about, I have title, subtitle, call it heading, and we'll do it for both of these. So class is equal to paste body, because that's how we named it earlier. Our paragraphs were our body text. So now I can individually select these and place them where I want on the grid. So that's going to be nice and handy, because now we can come into here, we can stay inside of this media query, and we can do an and title. I actually want to take all of them, so and title, and subtitle, and heading. Is that what I called it? Heading. And body. And we can do a grid column. I want it to go from 2 to 3 and hit save on that. So to show you what's happening, if you haven't used very much of grid, or you're not super comfortable with grid, I would first encourage you to be using Firefox, because Firefox's dev tools are the best for grid. You can click on the little layout tab here. Let's just move that over. And when you're in the layout tab, you can click this and you can turn on your grid, and you can physically see your grid, which makes it a lot easier. And you can display line numbers, which should be on by default. So I can see this is line 1, line 2, and line 3. So what I've done with this is I've said, I want all of these things to start at line 2 and end at line 3. So that's why now they're all stacked one on top of each other. Now the only issue is how things are laid out still doesn't look good. So pretty much each one of these is automatically making a new row. I have my row 1, here's one row, here's another one. So the row is the height of the content. This just has the margin top and bottom, so that looks like a really big space. This here with the lines in, it's my grid gap that I created. What's happened here is this is in the same row as my image, so my image is dictating the height, so it's making this really big empty space. And we're going to fix that soon, and then my paragraphs, so they look fine. So we want to fix my image first, so let's come to my image, and fixing the image actually is going to fix everything. And we can do a grid row of 1. Now, if I define the lines, you can see here I have line 1, line 2, and then line 3. It also means I have a line -1, or if I go to the bottom, we see it. A line -1, a line -2, and a line -3. You can work backwards, but only on lines you've defined, or on columns you've defined, or rows that you've defined. I haven't defined any rows, so I don't have negative numbers. So I can't actually do a -2, -3, or anything like that for my image, sadly. So I can do something. Let's just see how far down we have. We have to 6. I'm just going to say the image has the right to everything there, so that it does that. So you can see my image is flowing through multiple rows there, and it's taking up that space, and this is sort of coming together. The issue here is I have my margin. I have a margin here, and a margin here, and a margin here. Remember when I said I wasn't going to turn off that line? I might turn off that line, because all of these margins are causing an issue. It's easy enough to do, so I can just come and subtitle and after and display none if I want to turn it off. It also fixes almost everything that we had going on, so that definitely does help. So that looks much, much better. Now the other thing is I want to move my image up, so that's easy enough to do. I can say transform, translate Y, and I can move it up a little bit. The real question is how much do you want to move it up by? So this is of its own space. So I don't know. We'll start with negative 40%. We'll go with 30 maybe. That looks a little bit better. Okay, good. I like that. So just enough. It's just covering. I do this a lot actually in my designs where I have like sort of one part overlapping onto another one just because I sort of like how it looks a little bit better. Good. So I'm happy with that. I think that looks nice and dandy. This space is a little bit big, and I believe this has a margin on it. So maybe what I could do is come onto here and just say margin 0. Margin bottom 0. That looks a little bit better. And because this is left aligned, I'm going to stick with that where this one doesn't actually have the line. And I'll keep the line on these other ones just because it's a little bit of a different layout. Cool. I like that. Good. So in the next video, we'll take a look at the next sections. All right, so we're going to start working on this section now, and I think once we get this one done, it's actually going to go pretty fast to do all of them. So we're going to see if we can get all of these done in this video. Looking at this here, all I need to do is use grid to make this fall into 4 columns. So let's go and take a look at that. So this is my facts. We already have my limit width there, so we can come into this, and I want to build in at include MQ big. And for my big one, we want to do a display grid. So let's do that again. Display grid. I'll hit save. It's going to change nothing. And let's go and take a look at my grid because it's going to make it a little bit easier to work that way. So for my grid, I want to do grid. Before I did grid template columns, which is really long to write, if you just do grid, it's short for the rows and the columns. So you can just do an auto flow over, what do we want? We want repeat 4, 1 FR. So the auto flow just means sort of make columns, make rows as you need them to, and then repeat is going to make my 4. I need my grid gap of spacer. Yeah, I can just keep good gap like that, I guess. That's fine. So my grid gap is good. Then I need, wait a second, I have a small problem. Oh, we just need to change the width on this now. We can say a max width on it. I'm going to make it pretty big, and we'll test that out and see what it looks like. Yeah, we just need to overwrite that width that we were dealing with at our limit width. I was a little confused there. So we have our limit width is still going to work from around there. You can see it's working. And then right soon, it's going to snap. There we go. And then we get our 4 columns. Perfect. Much better than what we just had. And then our 4 columns should stay like that. But once we get up to 1200 pixels, yeah, it's good. So we can see once we pass 1200 pixels, the grid itself isn't growing anymore. We've limited the total width of it, so this gets locked in. Those don't get too wide, so we can still read them comfortably. Perfect. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Good. So that's looking pretty nice. The thing is, I'm just thinking here I need the exact same thing, but with 3 columns. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy you. Yeah, I'm just going to copy this one. And we're going to go to our mixins. I'm just wondering, should I build it? Should like my limit width here, when I did my limit width, I included it in the media query. I just realized, looking at this, there's no reason for a media query to be on this. Because if the screen's smaller than that anyway, it really doesn't matter. So I'm going to take the media query off of that one. And I don't know if we need the small size, but we're going to leave it there anyway. I just want to double check that I didn't break my site there somehow. But I don't, yeah, we didn't need the media query on that. I sort of wasted a little bit of time on that. I was thinking maybe we needed to include a bit of extra stuff in there, but we really don't need the media query. Okay, so the limit width, we're going to keep that like that. And then I'm going to do a mix in called grid. Or what are we going to do? We're going to paste in what I had before. But I don't want it to always be 4 columns here. I want this to be able to change, so this one can be a number. Or we'll say columns. Calls. How many columns I want, and then here we'll do calls. And should we have a default on it? Default's going to be 3 because this one's 4, but both other sections have 3 on it. So we have my grid, my autoflow, and my columns, my spacer, my max width. We should be good with all that. I would need this on it too, but I think they all already have a margin 0 auto on it, just to make sure it stays centered. If we see that we have an issue with one of them, I'll come and bring it back up into here. So let's go back over to my facts, and we can get rid of this and just say @include grid. Oh, except that's setting it to 3 columns, so I can hit 4 on that, and now it should give me 4 columns. Sweet. So now I have my 4 columns there. And this Bootstrap is sort of not needed anymore, right guys? If you're still using Bootstrap, you can see that CSS Grid, as long as you're not too worried about older browsers and stuff, it is for making columns and easily interchanging how many columns you have and stuff and making them responsive. It's not terribly difficult. So now we can do the same thing over here on this next part, our meals. So we can say @include MQ big, and then we want to do @include grid, and I think that's it. Sweet. And one last time on that our testimonial, we can come to here, come all the way down, @include MQ big, @include grid, except I did it on the wrong thing. Whoops. Save. Didn't I fix this? I thought I fixed my testimonial spacing. Oh, but you know what happened here is, here we probably have it. At the small screen size. I know why. There we go. Our limit width has the margin 0 auto on it, so it was overwriting my margin top. So I'm just going to put that underneath. And it's testimonials @include MQ big, @include grid. And you could say this is getting repetitive, so I could try and build something out of it, but I'm going to leave it like this. So now we should have it like that, and then look at that. We get our 3 columns. Super. So that is really, really nice. I'm really happy with that. The only thing, there is some sort of loose ends to get around. My navigation right now is just jumping. So that works. It jumps to each section. I don't mind it, but we're going to make it scroll. And I also need to come and fix this effect so it's a hover effect instead. So we're going to do that over the next couple of videos. So a couple of other things that I've noticed, because I was looking at the small screen size, and I've since made it bigger, and this is getting kind of too wide, and I have this massive gap that's coming here, which is a bit of an issue. So we need to fix those up. So the first thing we're going to do is just the navigation. So we can come over to our navigation. Where is it? Nav. And on our UL, we can just put a max width on this. Max width of, say, I don't know, 600 pixels. Let's just see what that looks like. Maybe a bit bigger, 800. Perfect, and a margin of 0 auto on there. That way it'll just stay like that. And we can play with it a little bit, but I think that sort of gets the job done, so it's not going to get too large once we start expanding it, but it will be able to shrink down at the smaller sizes. Okay, so now moving on to this section where that gap is just getting way too big at the large screen sizes, we can easily fix that Luckily for us, the background currently is white, so we don't have to worry too much about how things would explode out the sides of it. So on here, I can just come in and give this a max width of 1200, which is what we've been using for the rest of it, and a margin 0 auto, margin 0 auto. Well, the max width has worked. Do I have something that's overwriting my margin? Oh, I think I just hit save too fast before or something. There we go. It is working. Okay, good. So there we go. It's limiting. Now, if this did have a background color, it would be causing some more issues. We would be able to play around with the grid and get the grid to sort of do it instead, but it would get a lot more complicated to make sure that we're getting the same widths across our whole site and everything. So I'm not going to go and do that in this I'm not going to go and do that, and I don't think it's really necessary. It looks a lot nicer with the white here followed by the gray. But if you want to give yourself a challenge, that could be something you could look at undertaking. The last thing we're going to be looking at now is just fixing the typography, because we haven't made the font sizes bigger. So we'll do that in the next video. So this is just going to be looking at fixing up the typography and just doing a quick recap of everything we've done in this video. And yeah, that's about it, because it won't take long to fix our font sizes. Now the question is, which screen size do we want to fix our screen sizes at? And I think I'm going to do it at the small, quote unquote small one, just because I definitely want this font size to get bigger early on, because it's a little bit small. I think it's going to work well on phones, but as soon as you get to a tablet, I think we could afford to go up into a larger screen size, or even a big phone these days, because I did it at a pretty small media query. So what we're going to do is, let's just come in and right away on my body, we can do @include mq small, and that means we're actually using our small media query. I was worried about not having a use for it. So font size 1.125 rem, and remember, all these font sizes are in that markdown file that I had given you guys, so you can just go and grab all the numbers out of there if you're not just following along with me as I'm doing it now. Not all of the font sizes are going to change, but you can see that one just got bigger. One of the ones that needs to get a lot bigger is our title there. So let's find our page title, include mq small, and we want to do a font size of 5 rem, which is a lot bigger, but it's going to look much nicer. I like that a lot more. Super duper. And I think the last one we need to worry about is these titles here, which is my section title, @include mq small, font size 3.375, oops, 375, not 375, 0.75 rem. And there we go. It looks a lot more substantial at that screen size. So that's it for the changes in there, but I made this its own video just because I also wanted to take a look at just recapping everything we've done and taking a look at the file as a whole, and talking a bit about my approach that I took. So you can see here I've sort of been bouncing back and forth between things. I came and only created some of these mix-ins later on. I didn't make all these mix-ins. I created them as I needed them. These are the types of things, especially something like this. You can just throw anything you're pretty sure you're going to use in early in the project. So you can just make a file that you're reusing project to project to project for those abstracts, bringing the same ones in every single time. It can save you time that way. You don't have to rewrite stuff. Now this underline one was a little bit unique, as well as this limit width one, but the grid, I could definitely see myself using this in other projects, and as well, the media query one I use all the time. So anything you find yourself repeating a lot, come and make a mix-in for it. That's why right now when I added those media queries into my font sizes to change it, it really doesn't take very long. It's nice and easy to do. The other things we have looked at in doing in this project was just organizing our files for the first time. It's a fairly simple one, as we only had 3 different folders. If you find other people who will break this up into many more pieces, will name different things differently than I did. It's really, everybody has their own approach if you're not working in a team. If you're working in a team, obviously you need to adopt what other people in the team are doing and how they're working on it. And the last thing is, if you've run into any problems, you have any questions, or if you've updated the design and you've made it look better than what I have here, I'd love to see it. So come over on the Discord and please let me know about it so we can take a look. But that's for questions, problems, or just to show off. I'm gladly look at anything you guys have developed. So awesome job getting this far through and finishing this. I really hope you liked it.